Hello, everyone. Hello, Sean. Hello, Laurie.
Hello.
Whoa.
So, why are we here today? We're here because, as most of the people who are watching this channel expect me to talk about records and artists like Ellen Fullman, like Terry Riley, like Stuart Dempster, Malcolm Goldstein, Anna Holmer, or Jeff Greinke. I don't know. I've never known how to pronounce it. There's um, there's a connection I found recently between them, and this is a box where you can read 51, which doesn't tell much of the story. It's just the latest album by Laurie Goldston with Laura Kennel, and we'll talk probably about that as well. But um, I've played Laurie Goldston records for ever since I started this channel. But there's a deeper and more ancient connection with me, with her music and it is Nirvana. This is the last record of Nirvana I bought. She's not on this, but she is on the one that came after that I still don't have, but that after all this time has turned up to be my favorite one, actually, by far. The one that I enjoyed listening to the most. This one. If you don't know, obviously most people know about this recording, but the difference between this and most other Nirvana music is that there was strings on that record, and Laurie was responsible for that. And as Sean and I thought, like, it was a good time, it was due time to have a discussion about Nirvana. I thought, let's ask Laurie, who I didn't know personally at all until just now, if she'd like to have that discussion with us. And we were overjoyous to hear a positive answer from her. So, first of all, maybe tell us why you thought you wanted to have that discussion.
It seemed like a really nice discussion that was out of the normal, kind of more celebrity focused conversations, which are, people seem to like those, but that's not, for me, that's not my interest. I really come at things as um, I'm really interested in the music part. So I'm always happy to have discussions about that. And music's really abstract and it's very difficult. It's much easier to talk about, what people were wearing or whatever. So
Who they're dating.
yeah, right. Yeah. So I'm happy to help steer the conversation in a more, you know, kind of conceptual direction.
Yeah. Obviously, there's that aspect that we're interested in, but also a sort of more sociological, historical side of things, which is connected. They're both connected
Yeah.
with a band like Nirvana, if you want to see it that way, which is how we see it. So first, I think to have a little bit of a background, you're not from Seattle, but like you moved to Seattle during the 80s, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was when I was in my, early mid-20s. Yeah. So I've lived here most of my life. Yeah.
So you had been taught, you studied music, but you kind of, I think it's your own words, you deprogrammed, you de-learned.
Oh, detrained, I
Trained.
said. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have I started first on guitar, and then when you could take an instrument like for school orchestra, I picked cello. So I learned those things very differently, partly because it was sort of like public education, music education, and then for the cello. And I was also at a different age because I was 7 when I was on starting guitar. So, and it's very open. And I wasn't really from a family that listened to music very much, so I was just kind of like a blank slate with guitar. And then
If they didn't listen to music, how come they put you on the path of music?
I chose it. I mean, I just
In school then?
at home also, like, I just one day asked about this guitar that my brother had used, years earlier, and then I, just wouldn't stop playing it. So they just were my parents were really nice, and so and supportive, and were very, like pro education and pro culture, although, not so much into music. And so they just were like, I don't know, I guess we should find a teacher for her, like, what, so
Yeah.
And I, I was really into it. And then yeah,
That was on
obviously,
the East Coast, right?
yeah, that was in Long Island. Yeah, that was like in a suburb of New York. And then same thing, yeah, when I took up cello, and I did piano lessons for a while, and I was like in jazz band in high school on guitar and chorus, and so I sort of did as much music as I could. In the summer I would study music normally, and so but it wasn't like certainly nobody made me, but that my parents facilitated it, and they were supportive. But
And were you a music head as well?
yeah, but also very open. Like, I just would listen to the radio, at the time I would listen to the radio. And so it was just kind of whatever came around. I mean, eventually I bought records too, and I went to concerts, but I was always really open. So I would, like, when I was a really little kid, I would listen to just sort of top 40 stuff. And they were also really good because it was New York. So they were really nice, like R&B and soul stations and that kind of thing. And the pop music sort of moved in that direction. And then later on, classical music. And, once I was kind of in the middle of classical music pedagogy, I would listen to classical stuff. And it was New York, so there was all kinds of stuff. There were different kinds of rock stations. Like, there was a Prague station, and there were a bunch of salsa stations. And
there was also, like, I guess at the time, that is probably crucial for a lot of us, like being a teen, if you're a musician as well. I don't know exactly what age you are, and we won't ask you exactly that, but I assume your teens were right when the kitchen was happening in New York. Like, Rhys Chatham was running it, and there was lots of bridges between punk rock with Glenn Branca, Rhys Chatham, and more of the avant-garde, which is kind of also the tail end of the Velvet Underground and all that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, I was kind of all over the place, listening wise. Like, if I went into New York, I wasn't really, like, as a teenager, I didn't really know about that world so much. So I would be more inclined to go here, like, I'd go to, like, the opera or the ballet, or and also, like, blues stuff and rock. And I mean, it's so different. Growing up without the internet is just like a different universe. Like, it sort of, at that time, it sort of was just like whatever kind of drifted your way. Like, there was no Rhys Chatham in Long Island, that's for sure. I mean, I could, I read the Village Voice or whatever, but it was,
I guess, also going to the city as a young woman in the New York of that time was not the same experience as it would be right now.
Yeah, that's really true, actually. Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah, it was different. Yeah. It was, it was a much more dangerous place, for sure. I mean, I would do it, you know, but you had to really watch yourself at the time. Yeah. And I was like, not, you know, I was like semi street smart, but it's not the same. It's not the same. Also, like if you live someplace and you just have this air that you belong there and you know which block to go, you know, I didn't have that kind of granular understanding of it. So I think it was, I think I was fine with going around by myself. Like if I went to the opera and took the train home with my friend, but it would have been a different story if I was like going to a club on the Lower East Side. That's really a good point.
When you were, I'm sorry.
No, that was definitely a factor. You know, that changed over time. But yeah, even so, same thing. You know, if I was in college and I lived in Vermont, and I would go, it's like I could get around, but there were sort of layers that there were layers that didn't feel immediately available to me. You had to really be careful going around New York at that time.
Do you remember a time when sort of, and I know we're talking about you in your sort of teenage years, and it sounds like around that particular point you were sort of really into classical forms of music. Do you remember maybe the first
other stuff too, though, for sure?
And that is sort of what I'm getting at. Do you remember sort of the first sort of, I guess, left field or out there pieces of work that really intrigued you?
Yeah, it came from jazz, because I was playing a lot of jazz. I was studying jazz guitar, and I was playing in the I was really lucky in that where I went to school, we had really good music department in the high school, and there was a really great head of the music department, and there was a really good library of records there. So that was where I was first exposed to, like, I would say it was probably Eric Dolphy that made, you know, that was like the person that was like, you know, made me kind of like some light bulb went on about different ways that you could play and different ways you could think about.
Out to Lunch was the ground zero for me for jazz, the light bulb moment as well.
I know, yeah, right. It was interesting because it's really kind of like a missing link, right? Because it's like it really pushes it, but then it's like very recognizable to people who like to hold on to a more conservative idea about how jazz is defined, you know.
It has melodies, it has them playing together, everyone getting their solo, everyone freaking out, like the track Hat and Beards. Like it's just a perfect entry door to the idea of freedom, because you have Tony Williams, who's 17 when he's recording, and who is completely reshaping the rule book by sure, on the first and the fourth I'll be there, but everything in between is free, is open field.
Yeah, that's the first one that I can think of off the top of my head.
And were you then exposed to people like Monette Sudler, and people like that, like guitar players from the time, in this case female as well?
Yeah, not as much.
I mean, how would you get aware of?
Because I was playing also other stuff too on guitar. Like I was also studying a lot of folk stuff, like sort of finger picking stuff, and listening, and that was really big at the time. And
like stuff like Robbie Basho or John Fahey.
Yeah, a bit, you know, like more kind of source material of like Reverend Gary Davis and, you know, a little bit later, Joseph Spence. And then at the time also, everybody was like Hot Tuna was very popular then. And so everybody was interested in the things that Jorma Kaukonen had been listening to. So there was a lot of...
And I guess also back then it wasn't like now that like John Fahey, Robbie Basho, and all that are fine and classical cult. Back then it was what you could find. There was no hierarchy or no intelligentsia that was really putting a lens in it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would have had to order that stuff by mail, and I didn't have that much money. And certainly I wouldn't have run across those records probably anywhere on Long Island. I doubt it, you know. So yeah, again, it's a different world, without the internet, where it's just like whatever crosses your path, and you can, you know, sort of follow things, you know. But it wasn't like I had enough money to just go like dig around in record bins in New York or whatever. I mean, I was a kid, so I had a little bit of pocket change. Had enough to go into the city and go to a concert or whatever, but I didn't have like a lot of extra spending money for records.
So you were into music. You were learning music. You were performing, and And so you moved to Seattle in the mid '80s. What are you up to right before that?
I was living in Vermont right before that, and then I'd lived in Boston and in New York a little bit, and dropped out of college before that. I was in college for 2 years. And so, yeah, I was in Vermont, and I really liked it there, but I realized that, it wasn't, there was no way to make a living as a musician there, and I needed to be.
That was your goal?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it wasn't really like a well-defined goal, but it was more just like that. That's who I am, and that's what I do, and you know what I mean? I wasn't like going to go make it or whatever. Like, I think, in fact, I mean, for a long time, I would work another job and think, yeah, this is fine. And it was very cheap to live here, which is a lot of why. I mean, it was really, when I got here, it was a very nice balance of, there was a lot going on. It was beautiful. It felt relaxed. There were a lot of just cool, weird people around, and it was really inexpensive. So everybody just had a lot of time to work on stuff. There was low pressure, like you could just go work for a day and make your rent or whatever, a couple of days, you know.
It's kind of fantastic from a European perspective that you move from Vermont to Washington State, which in Europe you'd be moving from like.
Oh yeah, you'd go from like Berlin to Rome or something. Yeah, sure.
But you still managed to stay in the U.S. But was it like did you move there spontaneously, or did you go there first and investigate? Like,
no,
or was
it was spontaneous. I just stayed. I didn't think I would stay at all. It was just sort of all a little bit of an accident. I was like, sure, yeah, let's go. Let's go to Seattle. I've never been there.
So you had no friends there?
We got in the car and drove for 3 days or whatever. And then
you didn't know anyone there when you moved?
I knew one person.
Okay.
Who lived at his mom's house.
Was the idea to kind of, you know, again, at that particular point in time, where were you in terms of instrument? Were you did you feel?
I was really playing, I was just mostly playing cello. No, actually, I misspoke. I was playing cello, and I was also a bit of a percussionist. So because I was one of the things I was doing for work, which I did for a long time, was accompanying dance classes. So I got interested in percussion, and then that sort of kept that interest going. That, you know, that it was really handy for dance class accompaniment, and then I just got sick of carrying that much stuff around and just decided it was. I was like, I don't know how these guys do it, so I just was anyway.
It just makes me think of, like, I mean, now I'm flash forwarding a little bit into different parts of our conversation, but it reminds me of maybe a similar journey of Charles Curtis, who started with the guitar, then played cello, and now is like the main musicians for Eliane Radig, avant-garde music. And he also comes from a punk rock background. Like
Yes.
yeah. But so you arrive in Seattle, like when is that?
86 or something.
86 or something. How is it? Like what do you discover music-wise when you start to get yourself out there?
There were a lot of good improvisers. There was a really good scene of improvisers that had in part to do with the in part it had to do with the music department at the University of Washington at the time, which included William O. Smith and Stuart Dempster. So they were a little bit of a power duo, and a lot, like just a certain spirit radiated out of the department at the time. So I had a bunch of friends who had studied with him, and there was just a sort of a certain, with the both of them, and there was just a real kind of like atmosphere around that community at the time that was there were a lot of good players, and there was just this kind of real raucous spirit in general around art, I would say. Also it was happening here with poetry and dance, and there was a lot of kind of cross-pollinating between media. There was a lot of collaboration going on between writers and like everybody. It was partly it has to do with the size of the city at the time, that there is just there's like a certain moment in cities where there is stuff going on, but there's not really enough for people to have like separate scenes. So it's not like the dancers and the theater people and the musicians and the writer, everybody was just kind of just interested in the same stuff and going to the same things and hanging out. And there were a lot of mixed bills. There was a lot of sort of like, you might see a band, like there might be like some free improvisers and a band and somebody reading poetry or whatever. That was also, I think that was common a lot of places, but certainly it was common here at the time.
So it was sort of like a mixture of bohemian and academia.
Yeah, I mean, there weren't really academics involved, people went to school, but I don't think they identified as academics. I think they were bohemians with degrees.
It's just, okay, so let's say that the interests aligned with some aspects of academia, in the sense that like you're not talking about mainstream pop culture activities right now. Reading poetry in the 80s in Reagan's America, it's not the mainstream.
No, not mainstream at all. No.
But so that was. So how was Seattle back then? Was it like, were you in a sort of scene, or was it all around?
I just by my nature, I kind of like drift around the margins of scenes. So there were scenes, but I am not by nature, I'm not that much of a scene person.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It makes total sense. But that also puts you in a very good place to be a sort of observer of the greater picture then, maybe.
Yeah, I have a lot of information from a lot of places always. Yeah, I'm always a bit of a hub for that reason. Yeah, because I know a lot of people from a lot of different angles. Yeah.
But so let's say before the topic of the day, um, between 86 and 89 or 91, then what are you up to musically then?
I was doing a lot of free improvisation. I was sitting in with bands a bit here and there. I was working on some theater, like I was doing some music and a little bit of other performing, like doing experimental theater and accompanying dance classes and doing stuff with dancers, and also a lot of improvising with dancers. And I was doing also some early music. I had some early music friends, so we did had an ensemble that played out once in a while. And
When you say early music, what are you referring?
Medieval, Renaissance.
Yeah.
Maybe a little Baroque.
Yeah, so
yeah, I was
basically
probably
when
playing a little chamber music here and there, and maybe
the
sitting in with
music
some
that
folk people.
for those who don't know, this is basically around the time when we start to actually have notation, musical notation. That like Renaissance is kind of a turning point. It's also when people start to make art for art's sake and not just with a social or power function. And that is kind of we're kind of maybe living at the tail end of that revolution, unfortunately. But so okay, so you're doing that, and I remember, Sean, I mean, you're of a different age a little bit, but I remember that like as soon as I got into music in a big city like Paris, a small big city, it was easy to find connections, like you described, between you would go and see a noise rock band in a squat, then you managed to get invited to a theater to see Terry Riley, you'd go to see something you didn't really know what it was going to be, and it turned out to be a mixture of dance, theater, and improv, and you just took it in. And as a kid, I didn't have the language. I was just like making the best out of it and and trying to enjoy it, which was possible. Was there that kind of bubbling in the culture in Seattle back then, that like you would see people from different scenes that would like you cross-pollinate?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was very common. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And
Yeah, there are a lot. I mean, there are a lot of, there are people you could talk to who were like organizing things in Seattle at that time, who could tell you, give you really detailed history of those kind of collaborations. But, and I, I was just kind of in and out. And again, it wasn't like I, went to every single one of a certain kind of thing. Like I was kind of, all over the place a bit. I would go to like classical Indian concerts or whatever, just all kinds of stuff. So I, kind of cast a wide net.
Be like a simple question, but I guess what I'm really curious about, we're talking about, Indian classical concerts. You've studied a little bit with Milford Graves. You're kind of dipping your toes into, like Stunty said, a lot of sort of different waters. What is sort of the connection for you personally with all of that? Like, is there like a through line that even at that young age that you maybe started to discover, where it's like, I could go to this Indian classical concert and then I could go to this improv show or play this improv show? Were you starting to sort of see sort of those connections at that particular point in time?
Before you answer, I just wanted to add that like this experience I had in Paris and that you had in Seattle, I assume was the same. That a good thing about all of it was really cheap as well. Like,
yeah, right. Yeah, it was all very affordable. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I always saw the connection. I mean, I think I'm just inclined to see. It reminds me of my friend Molly describing her husband, my friend Torben Ulrich, who did a lot of different kinds of things, and she once described him saying that he sees the similarities between things more than the differences, and I think we have that in common. I don't have a very strong sense of genre, and I just by nature, and it's it's all music to me, and it's all really interesting. And if there's something going on that I don't understand, if I don't understand the way it's put together or the ideas behind it or the organizing principle of it, it really piques my interest, and I want to hear it more and learn about it. So that's just always, it's just like a personality thing.
You explained that.
Same thing with, like, I remember talking with a friend right before I started to do theater stuff, and she had this kind of vision that I would be doing theater things, and I was just like, well, I don't know, yeah, maybe I would, because I don't know anything about theater, so that would be pretty interesting, and then like a year or two later, that's the main thing I was doing, was working, you know what I mean? So I just don't, I'm just really curious. I just like to be learning all the time.
You explained to us that one, if not the main reason why you moved to Seattle was because it was cheap to live there compared to on the East Coast.
Yeah, that was why I stayed. I don't think I even knew that it was cheap, but most places were pretty cheap then. I mean, it was really different world. It was before, like people started investing in housing in the same way. So there wasn't this sort of like predatory corporate presence that jacked up the prices everywhere.
But obviously, if a place, a city, an area where it's cheap, that means there's less expectations, which means it's more free. That allows you.
Oh, totally. Yeah, nobody would have moved here to get famous. I mean, it would have been a joke.
And that's my point. During the 80s, in Reagan's America, the time of the yuppies, of neons, of long-haired rock stars who wanted to be the rebels, but also the most. I mean, the paradox of you see all these metal bands from the 80s who they want to be the rebels, but they also want to be the most popular at the same time, which is kind of, in a nutshell, it sums up the paradox of the time. Was there any sort of sense of, I mean, you kind of already answered that, but of stardom being possible to achieve in Seattle?
Yeah, I'll tell you who had done it. I mean, aside from Jimi Hendrix, but he did that when he moved away. But the two kind of like points to aim for at the time were Heart, who were from suburban Seattle, and Queensryche. And Queensryche came out of a suburban, also they were suburban, and they came out of a suburban metal scene, which, like, I don't know anybody who really knew anything about that. Like, metal was so separate culturally at the time that I think it was like a little bit of like a guilty pleasure if you liked metal and you were one of those guys. Like, sometimes Dylan from Earth would talk about that people would just like hassle him in Olympia in, or 1990 or whatever, if he liked if he like admitted that he liked metal,
And also Queensryche is coming at it from almost like a prog perspective, at that point.
Yeah, so that's in retrospect, but at the time it was just nobody would have said that. It was just like considered straight up metal band, and it came from this what was supposed to be this amazing, very local scene. It was like sort of a super group of this very amazing local scene in the suburbs that I didn't know anything about. I mean, I heard of it. I at some point I had a job repairing instruments in the suburbs, so I kind of got a little bit of a line just talking to one coworker there, but it was very, it was like very exotic knowledge for me to have. It was not.
When did like Seattle labels like K Records, for example, kind of become
Seattle? K is from Olympia. It's
Olympia. I'm sorry, but
yeah.
Something like a K or Sub Pop. When did that kind of scene start to arise on your radar?
I knew that stuff was going on in Olympia. And I had friends that had been more connected to Olympia a little earlier, like before I got here in the early 80s. So they were sort of on my radar from that, but then the connection fell through. Like I had friends who would do like improvised dance performances and stuff in Olympia kind of before I got here. And then my connections with, eventually I was much more connected to Olympia, but that was some years later. That was more like maybe mid-late 90s or something.
Just for those who don't know.
I knew it was going on, and I knew about K and Sub Pop, and K got a lot of press. And
just for those who don't know, how far is Olympia from Seattle?
It's a little over an hour. Probably it's like an hour and 15 minutes or something. South of here, it's physically a little bit closer to Seattle than Portland, but then it was sort of always a little bit more like psychically connected to Portland. I think everybody was just like too uptight or whatever in Seattle. I don't know what was going on.
So as I was
but eventually, if I can finish this, sorry.
Yeah.
Eventually, years later, I was very connected with people in Olympia, but not during the time we're talking about. I don't remember having too many connections.
You've been doing stuff with Steve Fisk and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, but that's later. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I didn't really know. I mean, I kind of, I saw him around or whatever, and I loved. I was really excited to meet him and make friends with him and work with him eventually, because when I first moved to Seattle, I heard this one Pell Mell record everywhere, and it blew my mind. It was so good. Like his ideas about production and placement, completely blew my mind. I'd never heard anybody with such clear, compelling ideas about sound. So it was really thrilling
Sean,
to meet him eventually. I would see him around all the time, and there was a certain neighbor. Also, that's what happens when things are cheap, is that people can be closer together. Certainly with Paris, that really exploded out, and New York certainly too. But when things are cheap, everybody can live near each other in the same shitty building with the cafe in it or whatever. And so everybody was sort of more accessible. So eventually, I knew who Steve Fisk was, and I would see him around, and then, eventually he'd say hello or whatever, you know what I mean?
So I have this idea that so back in the late 70s, when disco was at its highest, and it got killed by neocon lobbies who's lobbied against it, and hence the disco sucks movement, hence replacing everything that has synthesizers and colors, different colors, because that was the fear with disco, that suddenly it was unsegregated. You go at a party, there would be Black people, Latinos, Asian, gays, old people were also welcome, which is kind of unusual in youth culture. Disco did that, and so it got crushed, and we got the MTV pop and the hair metal during the 80s. And I think that what we're here to talk about is sort of reality course correcting a little bit, like as I was hinting at, this sort of paradox of having people who look like the rebels, who look like the outcasts, and who are the most popular, obviously for kids who were growing up with that, like me, and like the guys from Pavement and all that, at one point, like it creates a sort of, it doesn't work anymore. We need something more real. And that's what we got with Nirvana and the punk rock from Seattle, which was like a blue collar city area. And as you now explained a little bit, that was only that close, or that not that far away from getting exposed to stuff that is outside of the mainstream culture, that was almost omniscient and omnipotent during the 80s.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I think it was a very, it was like a very, porous wall between the, it wasn't really a wall even, I would say. Yeah.
But so in that regard, I think that all that happened in Seattle back then was way more political than we gave it credit for. Not in the sense that there was a political intention, a conscious one, but like as a whole, that was really a reaction that it was socio-political to what had been going on for 10 years or so.
Yeah, right. It was connected to those things for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know that all, I don't think all those bands were overtly political, but they came out of political movements. Yeah, they came out of inherently political movements, and they were adjacent to a lot of inherently political movements.
So when these bands these rock bands from Seattle are starting to get semi-popular and local famous in the in 89, 90, does the city notice?
Like the city government?
No, I mean,
who defined the city
in general. I mean
sure. Yeah, people were excited about that, and people were also excited about like other bands coming in, especially like people coming in a bit from Europe and from the Bay Area in particular, and LA. There were a lot of sort of movement up and down the coast. And absolutely. There was a lot of energy around it and interest, and there was a very fun, love of subversive energy.
And the sort of paradigm shift, in the sense that the 80s is all about being number one, being a winner, and everything that's happening at that time, also considering where these people came from, these musicians, these rock musicians, it's a paradigm shift. Suddenly, like wanting to be like number one, wanting to be powerful and almighty is kind of disgusting.
Yeah, there was definitely disdain for that. And like I remember having a discussion with my writer friend, Jesse Bernstein, who was, very well known around town. I mean, which is kind of amazing, to think of like a poet being that kind of locally famous, just sort of just from people knowing him, not from getting any kind of hype. And I remember him talking specifically about it being like a badge of honor to drive a shitty car, or, like if you're a real artist, you just don't have money. It's clear that you haven't been chasing around after money.
So it must have been really interesting, talking about all of that. And then I guess sort of Stunty, what you're kind of getting at is there's sort of layers to this, right? Because at some point, I think what Stunty was really getting at, a publication like The Rocket, for example, starting to take notice of what is actually happening, and sort of at that particular point between like 86 to 89, sort of like a microcosm of a scene that started to really branch out. And again, a publication like The Rocket, which has its ear to the ground, but I think when you start to reach the level of The Rocket, that publication reached a lot more people that are outside of the underground. So I guess sort of my question, and maybe Stunty, this is what you were sort of getting at. What did that sort of feel like? That sort of weird area of right before things sort of blew up, and there was sort of this community that, at least from my perspective and historically from what I've read and the scenes that I've been involved in growing up in the DIY sort of community here in Baltimore and DC, there's always this sort of feeling before things explode or get bigger that it doesn't get any better than this. What I've got here in the shitty warehouse that I live in, and that 100, 150 people show up to shows, that's as good as it's going to get, and that's all I want. Was it strange, or what was sort of the experience like when you saw the Rocket or bigger publications start to talk about your friends or people that were in the underground?
I mean, the Rocket wasn't a big publication. I mean, I think it's like probably taken on a sort of mythic quality now, but no, I mean, it wasn't of that much interest to that many people. I mean, there were a lot of people who were interested in music locally, but I don't think anybody outside of Seattle was interested in the Rocket particularly. I mean, a few people here and there, but
yeah, I just mean within Seattle, within the sort of that community of musicians. Or
it was fine. I mean, they didn't really. The Rocket wasn't really interested in anybody that I knew. Hardly anybody. Once in a while, maybe, but it wasn't like. I wasn't really, a rocker then. I mean, I was I became more of a rocker later in life. So I've had a kind of the opposite trajectory of most people. And at the time, I was, doing a bunch of stuff that the Rocket wouldn't have been particularly interested in.
I guess that what connects it from our perspective, from distance now, is that both in a place like Seattle, Olympia, what connects the avant-garde, the bohemian avant-garde that you were part of, and the punk rockers, is that both have to have a do-it-yourself ethos, mentality, aesthetic, or economy more than anything else, maybe.
Sure. Yeah, right. Yeah, no, there's a lot in common in terms of the, values and priorities, and
which is how maybe a band like Earth, and you'll tell us in what capacity you were involved with that, but Earth, is it a metal band? Is it an avant-garde music band? And
here's my big treatise on Seattle music and Pacific Northwest music, is that traditionally there wasn't that much institutional support here, and there wasn't that much attention, and so everybody was kind of left to their own devices to work and make art. Some people wanted to get famous or tour or whatever like that, but generally speaking, everything was just kind of like everybody was going about their business, making art, and it was always a place where there was a very loose division between genres, and so then you get a play, and also it offered a lot of opportunities for inventiveness. So Hendrix is like the rock guy who's like really a blues and kind of a jazz guy, and Nirvana's the band that's like kind of a punk band, but really they like metal and pop music, and that was really typical of the music here. And so I think that was part of what just made me like get along with this place, Also, like even the improvising was like that, like the one of the people I played with the most was like in a bunch of metal and punk bands, and also great free improvisers. So it just kind of had its own local language that was always this mix of things. And I think this, I mean, I think it's a little, I think it's less prominent right now, but I think in general, over the course of history, music history here, there's been there's been this fluidity between genres.
Because it makes me think of a record that came out this year that both Sean and I really loved, which is the Gwynethard Raymond album. She's a woman from Wales, I believe. It's her third album, and it's like modern primitive finger picking guitar, and she plays in metal bands, in punk bands, and stuff like that. But her solo career, like, she has a very, very strong direction there but that she can seamlessly walk away from to embrace other types of music, even though from my perspective it's more connected, all of that.
Right, yeah. And so I think, same thing with Earth, you know, it really falls in between a lot of things, so you can't really pin it down.
I mean, if it wasn't
I would say, if I, you know, to sort of define Earth, and it sort of is like the metal band that's like actually really kind of a, you know, like minimalist drone project or whatever, you know, but also it's like kind of a jazz band, and, you know, so that's you know, as Pacific Northwest as it gets, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and if it wasn't for Earth, for example, I wouldn't know about Lamont Young, right? Like, that was Earth was like the gateway for me to get into Lamont Young when I was, you know, like 15 years old, you know, and
right.
And if it wasn't for a band like Earth, I don't think and so to your point, and I think you put it really well, is you didn't really, you know, again, I come from Baltimore, DC, and, you know, I think both Stunty and I, we sort of quote unquote studied a lot of these sort of DIY scenes, especially like in the US. But it just doesn't seem like there was that sort of, you could really sort of put Terry Riley or Lamont Young in a band like Earth, and it makes sense. Like, I don't think that was happening anywhere else to that degree other than like Seattle, you know, and that's a really unique thing. And so it goes to your point, what you were saying earlier about you sort of living sort of, not outside of the margins, but that you weren't really stuck in one particular scene. Like, that really didn't. So it makes sense why Seattle was attractive to you, I guess.
Yeah, no, it just always worked out for me. Yeah, I just kind of really, I felt like I just kind of got along with the place, and everything just fell into place for me pretty easily for a long time.
So here's another paradox that suddenly stumbled upon the head of everyone there. Like, there's a very like alive scene of artists from all types of trades in a way there, and suddenly, because of the huge immediate success of one of them, every like marketing kicks in, and everyone needs to be rationalized into an easy to digest concept in a way.
Yeah,
like,
sure, yeah.
And that was
much less organic, of course, yeah. And then also there's like a flood of people who come here to be famous.
So how was it? Did you experience that? Like, people turning up because like, we want some of that?
Oh, yeah. In droves, yeah.
How did people, I mean, I think I know how anyone would feel about it, but how was it?
Yeah, it was just really weird. I mean, I don't know how, you know, it was,
I mean, there's that famous sort of story, and her name escapes me, but she worked at Sub Pop, and there was that story where I think it was probably 92. The New York Times called her, or called up Sub Pop offices, and so she just started sort of fucking with them, and just made up a bunch of slang that never existed in Seattle, because it was so ridiculous that the New York Times would be so, and they weren't interested in sort of the music culture. You know, they're not talking about the nitty gritty like we are. They were just, like Stunty said, there's this sort of idea of a capitalistic quick fix, you know, and
there's a very funny, there's like a very smart, and I would say like emotionally engaged, you know, kind of ironic snottiness that really points to. That was really lovely. I mean, I really think that's funny, and it's really like it really binds a community together. Like that's really how you would sort of define. For me, that's a big part of how you would define culture, like kind of a certain tone. I guess that's like if I think about. I mean, I went to when I was just in New York in the fall. I went to see Robert Ashley opera, and then there was like this certain tone. There was just this really certain tone to it, and they really pulled it off. Like you really got this certain kind of delivery that was like very, very 80s, like this very sort of dry, snide, funny tone, a lot of irony. And for me, that's what defines that era the most, I guess. That's what kind of like captures the essence of it, or that captures the feeling the most of that time. And it pervaded everything, certainly, Nirvana was party to it, and it's kind of it's sort of transcended media and genre,
I guess, yeah, like there's a sort of like defiant nature of things coming from that area, and you say snotty, but it's like in '89. Fantagraphics moved to Seattle, and they were publishing stuff like Peter Bagg, which was very influential for punk rock, and Daniel Close, who did like the Ghost World 8-Ball, and there was obviously the Love and Rockets, and there was also like one of their finds from then was Jim Woodring from Seattle, who was a garbage man and taking lots of psychedelics, or that's the story. And it kind of has like, it taught me, the hate.
There was a lot of cross-pollinating between those, comics world and music world.
But in a sense, it kind of told me like, the garbage man knows best. Like, like, you can get like the best, we came from 10 years of bullshit, of like self-serving hyping, like the garbage man knows best.
You want the guy who just has had his head down and he has whatever job and he's working and he's focused on his work and he got really good at it. I'll say, if you want to do a deep dive ever into that world and those sets of connections, the link for that is Larry Reed, who runs the Fantagraphics bookstore and was an organizer of shows and had a gallery at that time. He is the encyclopedia of Seattle at that time. He made a lot of it happen, so he'd be a good person to talk to.
Let's do that, yeah. So Sean discovered Nirvana in '91, but so did the whole world. I mean, you don't get street cred points for that one.
Well, I don't want to make it too personal, because Stunty and I were talking about this offline. But from my perspective, again, I have cerebral palsy, so I have a disability. I use a walker to walk. I didn't have sort of and this isn't a woe about me thing. I'm very lucky and privileged, but I wasn't able to go outside and play and things like that. So I was stuck really young with my dad's record collection. So I'd always knew about music at a very young age. And like Stunty said, with most people, I had discovered Nirvana like the most of the mainstream, which was through the Smells Like Teen Spirit video. But even then,
the biggest song in since a Bowie song in the 70s.
Yeah, but even then I knew at 9 years old that this was something different, that this
Yeah.
was something beyond the Yes records or the Ramones records that my dad was playing for me,
I mean,
and so yeah.
as
Yeah,
teens,
yeah. I mean,
just both Sean and I, as teens from the time, like for us, like as Sean said, it was immediate that we knew we could hear the difference. Like that was
no, that really
opening a path.
that radiated out to people everywhere, and there was something about that way of doing things, even though obviously it sort of busted out of its kind of local community bubble, but there was something about that way of putting things together that beamed a lot of information to a lot of people about what was possible, and also very explicit messages of like Kurt being on stage and being just like, you could do this if you want, like just get a guitar and you do the same thing. So yeah, kind of very anti-hero worship, and it comes out of that.
It's
that world. It comes out of that community-based world, but people, I think it really spoke to a lot of people, and a lot of people try to explain that to me, like that feeling of just like people who do a lot of different kinds of music, or people who I meet or work with, and they were just like, yeah, that was like, it made a really big impression about how to put your life together and how to get together with your friends and do stuff and not wait for permission and just like go out and make a scene. There were other, make your own scene. There were other bands doing that at the time too, but there was like, that was, Nirvana was the one who was doing that, and it really, it echoed far and wide for sure.
But it's interesting too, because we're talking about sort of, underground scenes, avant-garde music, underground music. But, I think the elephant in the room, and Laura, you're sort of getting at that, is it did take this sort of mainstream exposure for all the bad that comes with it. But it did take this sort of mainstream exposure to really influence somebody like myself. Because again, the through line with Nirvana to me is not just punk rock. It's avant-garde music. It's experimental music. It's free jazz. Like, again, that through line exists.
Well, it's kind of even the beginning of avant-garde, in the sense of like, Brusolo, the Italian futurists. Like, since when I first saw Nirvana, the one thing I noticed, because I didn't know it existed, was the noise. Like they literally brought noise to the mainstream, which was not possible. Like, no one would have thought that would ever be possible in a way. Maybe you could say Sonic Youth and the Velvet Underground on their own level, but on that scale, completely impossible.
Yeah.
So
my question is, the scale was really unexpected, I think.
Yeah. And so how and when did Nirvana seep into your life, Laurie?
They just called me and asked. I mean, I heard
but
on
before,
the radio or whatever, and I had friends who would go see them. But
I mean, like, when did you first hear them or see them, or?
I saw. I mean, I knew about them like when Bleach came out or whatever. I liked them. I heard them on the radio and at people's houses. It wasn't like on the front of my mind. It wasn't really. It wasn't what I was like super into at the time, but it was around, and I liked them a lot. I mean, I of those bands, that was the one that was the most compelling to me. And then they called me and asked me to play with them. So, and I could do it because I played guitar, so I could improvise and play by ear, and you didn't have to write stuff out for me, or
Did you ever
hum something, or I could make up a part? And it was kind of an unusual. At the time, it was for a cellist. It was an unusual skill set. There were a couple other people in town who could have done it, but not too many. There were maybe 2 or 3 other people who could have done it.
Did you ever figure out how they got into? Like, did they know people that you knew, and that did?
Yeah, it was from my friend. It was from a mutual friend, Billy's brother. Yeah, somebody who I'd worked with, and she had done some kind of public art projects that had to do with the war in the Balkans, and so she was in touch with Chris. So that was the connection.
And did they call you specifically for the session, the MTV session, or was it for specific
No, I
songs
toured
they
with
had?
them. I toured with them
Yeah.
before that. I mean,
Yeah, so it was for specific songs they wanted
yeah,
you.
they were gonna. Yeah, we kind of were. You know, it was sort of a little bit of a trial run that we played at Roseland in New York in July or something, and then that worked out. So they asked me to go on tour with them, and when they're touring North America with In Utero, and they were going to have a kind of acoustic set in the middle. I think partly just to make it sort of more sustainable, also interesting musically, and that was going to be kind of a practice run for Unplugged, because everybody kind of like Unplugged was this kind of new hot thing, and everybody kind of like wanted to put on their best for Unplugged. So it was like they wanted to be really relaxed into it and have worked that way for a stretch of time on tour. So I toured with them. It was like I have to move. I actually have to wrap up soon, but I have to move because the dog's going to be barking here for a second.
So so I guess like even if you knew about them like with Bleach, like in '91, everyone knows them, and in '93 they call you for that. So you were aware of some of the songs. Like usually back then, when a rock band adds strings to their songs, it's often like I don't know, like Sting or Bono, who wants to add some sort of legitimacy or grandeur, air of grandeur type of things. In your case, it was not this case at all, right? Oh, I mean, it was quite different.
Yeah, that I don't know. Do I add to or detract from legitimacy? Personally, I don't know. But it was different. It was definitely a different way of doing it, and it wasn't. Yeah, people didn't really add cellos to bands at that time. Yeah, no, it was kind of like out in left field for sure. It was a weird thing to do at the time. Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
what they were asking you to do, like, was it very specific, or did you have room for
It varied. Like sometimes sometimes they'd hum something to me, or sometimes I'd make up the part, or try different things. Yeah, it varied. I mean, there was nothing. They didn't have anything written out, but sometimes, obviously sometimes I'm playing a specific counter melody. And
was Roseland the first show that you did with it? Because from a Nirvana perspective, that Roseland show that you're talking, I know the show that you're talking about, that's a pretty well-regarded show.
That was the first show I played with them. Yeah.
Did you remember anything specifically about that sort of jumps out at you with that particular?
I remember being really nervous beforehand. That's about all I remember. I mean, it was a little bit, it was stressful. So I was a little bit like, slightly disassociative from the stress, I would say.
How did they make you feel about the whole experience?
I was glad I pulled it off. I felt like I did a good job, and I had like a lot. It was kind of like the last time it was the last time I had stage fright.
Yeah.
It kind of broke me. It kind of just broke me. And I never really had stage fright after that.
So for Unplugged, then that must have, now that you just mentioned kind of, you didn't have stage fright after that Roseland show. I know for Unplugged, and it's, again, this is just sort of Nirvana lore, but there was a nervousness, I think, that the band had, according to sort of the lore, that show could be a disaster. They weren't really quite sure how it was going to go. Rehearsals, from what's been reported, seemed like they weren't super great. And then something kind of clicked right when they started recording the Unplugged session. From your perspective, did you kind of feel like as the show was going on, like, oh, we're really executing something special here?
No, I thought it was a little sloppy, to be honest. I mean, what do I know? Good thing I wasn't in charge of the session, because I thought I was a little bit just like, oh, it was pretty good. We could probably, like when they talked about doing stuff again, like if it doesn't go well, we could do them again.
Like penny royalty.
And I think that they thought, that was like, we really, I mean, in retrospect, I assume that was just like, yeah, if we really flubbed it, we could just do a song again. But then we were done, and they were like, yeah, that seems good. We don't have to do anything again. And I thought, I don't know, it was good. We could probably do it better. I mean, that's just me. Also, I'm just like always, it's just part of my job to be sort of like critical of my own work. So I don't have any kind of, subjectivity. I didn't feel like I messed up or anything like that. But I thought, I don't know. Yeah, what do I know? But I thought we could have done it a little better. But I mean, now I like it. I think it turned out great. It was like, good thing nobody asked me. And I wasn't going to say anything. But I was like, when we finished, and they said, like, all right, yeah, that's good. I was like, well, really? I don't know. I thought I would just do some more, but it was very nerve-wracking. It was a nerve-wracking situation. So also you're just like, okay, nothing got fucked up. Let's call it, because it was just, it was high pressure situations, just like, cameras swooping around on boom arms or whatever. It was like nerve-wracking situation. For
that In Utero tour that you were on, did you start to see sort of the cultural impact that Nirvana had either from the jump at Roseland or when you were on that In Utero tour, and sort of, if you did see sort of the cultural impact on that tour, what sort of did you pull from it?
I mean, I just had to like, get to where I needed to go and play as well as I could. And I saw a lot of just like really happy teenagers, like thousands of happy teenagers every day who were really having a great time. Like it was just like a dream for them to be there. So,
and how did that make you feel?
It was nice. Yeah, it's nice to, it's nice to be, I like teenagers, and I mean, it made me like teenagers even more, which I did already. And then, who doesn't want to be around a bunch of really happy people? It's a nice feeling,
But knowing where you're coming from and the music that you were discovering, learning, taking part of, like, were you thinking about that when you were doing stuff with Nirvana, the cross-pollination of like, and maybe asking yourself and maybe asking them directly, why do you want that? Is there like a direction to that you were they interested? Or when we say they, like they is, we know there are very different people, or I assume at least all of them, like was there?
No. I mean, my job was to just, there, it was about, their vision. And I wasn't going to be just like, why isn't this, weird or whatever. I mean, it's not my business. Yeah.
No, but from your perception, I mean, since they have, like, if you count everything, they have like 4 or 5 albums, and they're all very different from each other, like very, very different.
Yeah.
And I dare to say that each record they did is better than the previous one. And luckily for you, you're on the last one. So, but did you have any conversations with any of them about where they wanted to go from there?
Kurt talked about wanting to do something quieter, and because partly he didn't think it was sustainable with his voice, and he also was interested in doing other stuff, and he talked about wanting to do something with oboe, like I think more chamber music-y. I think he would have I think one thing that he was thinking of was just doing stuff that was more interesting to him musically and would probably be less popular. And maybe partly, to just have less of a hassle of the celebrity. But also, I think just artistically, I think he was thinking about sort of stretching out in that way.
Do you kind of see that as like almost like him going into a more experimental or avant-garde direction, or it was just sort of that idea?
I don't know. Yeah, the music, like the specifics of what, the musical vocabulary of that, I have no idea. That's anybody's guess. But he didn't really, he didn't. I mean, it's just by nature, it's a more experimental thing to do, right? I mean, just by virtue of the instrumentation, just have a cello or an oboe or whatever. Yeah, that's. I mean, especially at the time, it was pretty far out.
It was far out because as someone who was changed and by them and who followed them since the beginning, at least on records, at first I was like, the whole idea of the MTV Unplugged was not for me. I thought like, oh no, what are they doing? It felt like so much so that I kind of refused to honestly confront myself to it. And now, like, it took a few years to realize that it's, as you say, it was quite far out.
Yeah, right. It's hard to have that in perspective now because it's kind of like iconic thing. Yeah, but at the time it was a very quirky thing to do.
There was another musician who did a few shows also on cello with them. I don't know if it's because you were not available. And I've read that she was like, she was saying that doing that experience with them taught her about everything that is wrong with fame.
Yeah, that was later on. So yeah, I mean, obviously we know what happened. So yeah, they were. I mean, it was a more and more unhappy time. Yeah. So I mean, it was a bit of a grind when I was there, but yeah, I mean, the facts are the facts. So I don't know what to add to that. Yeah, I mean, it didn't work out, obviously, right?
Yeah, but I think like since like you were from there, like. I assume that from the get-go, when you took part of that adventure, there were eyes on you constantly. Not necessarily on you.
Nobody cared that much about me. No, nobody.
No, but I mean, like, just by that they were on them, on the band. Like, there were people around it all the time, I assume. So, did that inform, do you think, the music in itself? And how did it inform you in your future music?
I don't think it really affected me that much music-wise, actually. Weirdly, I just am like I kind of just like it doesn't register with me. The fame part's not interesting to me at all.
Yeah, but it's
so,
like
I did. That's like the least interesting part of the whole thing to me. Is the fame part. So I don't know what else. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you about that.
No, that I understand. It's just that I was wondering how it can not affect you while you're in the whirlwind of it all. But
I mean, everybody was just so much more interested in Kurt than me. I mean, I was like a footnote. I mean, I still am, and just a footnote in a lot of ways.
But I think not to cut you off, Stunty, but I think, and this is I'm complimenting you, because I think that for somebody like Stunty and myself, when we talk about a band like Nirvana, and this part I'm just speaking for me, Stunty, but I think this would apply to you too. As we get older, as I get older, I'm more interested in these connections, again, like I've been saying throughout the conversation, of deeper music. Something that, because look, I love Nirvana, and I was very lucky last year. My band mixed a record with Barrett Jones from Seattle, and he worked with Nirvana, but I was more interested in his work with like Carp or like Pussy Galore or bands like that.
Mm-hmm.
And Nirvana in a weird way, and I mean this kind of jokingly, they've become a footnote to me now. And I mean that in the way that's like, oh, because of Nirvana, I got into Carp, right? You know, and now Carp or Pussy Galore or Cherubs or avant-garde music is more interesting to me. And so to bring this back to you, Laurie, so when I, like, you know, for example, like you put out a record this year on Relative Pitch, one of the best experimental labels in America going. The fact that there's those connections there, that I could be like, hey, like this person that played with Nirvana put out a record on Relative Pitch. I mean, you did a record with Greg Kelly, one of the most interesting like trumpet players in the last like 15 years. I guess what I'm really sort of getting at, Laurie, is it's people like yourself that drive me to discover different kinds of art, different kinds of music, different kinds of culture. It isn't the Kurt Cobains. I mean, it was when I was 9, 10, 15, 20 years old. But at a certain point, that became less interesting to me and more interesting your story, where you come from, where the people that really sort of kind of push this sort of underground scene, I have more interest in than the stars that burn the most bright, right? And so I think to your credit, Laurie, you know, I listened to that record you did with Greg Kelly. I think it was like 2022, 2023. One of the most interesting minimalist cello records. Like it's just, I think it's ahead of its time. And I think the album on Relative Pitch, like it sounds like if you're a fan of like Sun or something like that, you've got to listen to that record. So I think for Stunty and I think part of the reason to have this conversation is it isn't necessarily, it is about Nirvana, but it isn't. It's more about the DNA and all of that. And I think that's what makes this conversation really interesting. So when you're talking about how the cross-pollination of the 80s, late 80s Seattle was to where you are now, that is a more interesting story than the fame that Kurt Cobain had. We've heard that a million times before, you know? So yeah, to your credit, Laurie, I think you're not just a footnote. I think to people like Stunty and myself, you are super
fame-wise I
important.
am, but I mean, yeah, no, I'm a little bit sort of like, no, I hold my own and I feel good about my work. I have a nice trail that I have left behind me and a good resume, and I play constantly. I'm always learning stuff. I'm super engaged. I have more and more fire in my belly about it. I have been a gateway, like you're saying, in a lot of ways for a lot of people. I'm very, very, very proud of that. And
Laurie,
you guys are just like really nerdy. So you're kind of like my target audience for like what I am doing, de facto, So I love that world, and I make somehow, I've been very impractical and I haven't thought about fame, and I think in this very abstract way, in this very sort of primal way about music, and I haven't really managed my career in any kind of a practical way. I've never had a manager or a booking agent or no, nothing. I've just been one foot in front of the other. I play all the time. I just make it work. Scattershot, because I can do a lot of things. I'm interested in a lot of things. I learn stuff. If somebody asks me to do something I know how to do, I say yes, and I figure it out. And I love to be like scrambling, and I love being either a performer or an audience member when you could like hear the gears turning in somebody's head. And so in that way, I'm not really cut. I liked playing with Nirvana, but I'm not cut out for that kind of work because I don't want to go play the same record. Like people asked me to tour with them afterwards, and it was just, I got asked by somebody, and then and they wanted me to give like a I don't know, 2-year commitment. Oh, we're going to do North America, and then, we're going to do Europe, and then we'll probably go to Japan, or, 2-year commitment or something like that. And I could use the money always. I don't have, I've just been like kind of, I'm doing fine, and I have a house, but I've been more, more or less hand to mouth. I don't make any money on the Nirvana stuff. Like, I just got paid day rate, and that was it. So I could have used the money, but then, and I this was not that long after, and then I had to turn it down because I was writing a puppet opera. I thought that was really funny, but that really is like it's like a real that kind of sums it up. I had to say no because I was in the middle of writing a puppet opera with somebody, and I wasn't going to stop doing it because I was more interested in my work, and the idea of playing the same album the same way for 2 years is it's just not for me. It's just like a little bit soul crushing after a while. It was okay, with Nirvana, but I wouldn't have liked to have done it for that much longer because it's just like I'm just not that interested in playing the same songs every night in the same way. It's a big operation. You have light people, so you have to do it in the same order, and everybody got sick of it. Everybody was just like exhausted, and it's just not sustainable in a lot of different ways.
But
and it's not very creative. Once I was on the bus, once we were on the bus, somebody had just given them, we were in Montreal, and somebody had given them a VHS tape of the last time they'd been in Montreal, where they played for 150 people, and everybody's packed in this club, and I thought, that's the show I would have liked to have played with them. It was fine. The one I did with them was a good show, and I'm not ungrateful, but I, for me, that's more my cup of tea, to be packed in a little club or a basement or something like that. That's much more compelling to me.
But I think that the level of attention, of stardom that a band like that achieved by then, I don't think we can achieve that this is happening ever again.
Yeah, no, it's much more diffuse now. There's no way.
Yeah. And the good thing about it, of course it's good, but like for youth who want to express themselves, as you were at one point in your life, like where you're discovering yourself and discovering what is possible. Nowadays, you got like people who are in their early 20s, people like Leila Bordreuil, for example, in New York, who's also a cellist. There's a lot of people, of young people doing church organ albums. Like in the underground now, like the underground in the late 80s, early 90s, it was punk rock bands. Now you have people playing your instrument and doing the avant-garde of what it's supposed to be, instead of being not that is what you were, but the token classical instrument within rock or whatever. Like, I think that I don't know if it would be fair to say that you alone allowed that, but just being a visible figure in one of the
it definitely broke something open very suddenly. Yeah.
And you don't need, it's not about like, being a virtuoso. Like, it's just cool, and it can be rock and roll, and it can be youth culture to play the oboe, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The one thing that's an interesting split is that, like, once you get into, jazz, they talk about this, and then it's like there's a lot of sort of abstract stuff that doesn't get taught in like Western classical pedagogy about like feeling and making a sound together and that kind of thing. So those, I think it helped introduce people to those kinds of concepts. Also, all having to do with like kind of like timbre as a parameter, and so it sort of opens up those ideas. Also, once you plug in, it turns into a whole different thing, and it's not like there's a very binary sense of what the instrument's supposed to do, what's the the right sound and the wrong sound of an instrument. And then once you get into people, you know, plugging into distortion pedals or whatever, or singing differently, then you have this whole other realm that you're dealing with that's not even a parameter that's discussed much at all. You know, maybe as like a special effect if you have sort of extended technique, but in, you know, classical music, it's not even, doesn't even exist that you would use the instrument that way, you know, to sort of play around with the color of it. So yeah, it opens up a lot of different kinds of ideas that don't get introduced to those instruments.
I know, Stunty, you were mentioning that this could never sort of happen again, in terms of like Nirvana. And so, you know, the one thing that, and Laura, you had sort of said this in terms, I think you used the term diffused, you know, there isn't a monoculture anymore. You know, everything is sort of spread out in different ways. And, you know, I think you were part of something that I think was one of the last big sort of monoculture, youth culture movements.
Yeah.
And so for you to have sort of a role in that and to expose young people, people that maybe have had access to avant-garde music or classical music. And so for you to be a part of that, I think for me, you know, again, I go back to what I said a couple of minutes ago, it's just really extraordinary. Because if you think about it, especially the way things are now, again, I don't think we're ever going to see something like that again, where there is this sort of singular artist that can, or band, whatever you want to call it, that can really introduce people to things that are outside their sphere. You know, and it's such a, that's what makes this all very interesting to me. And I think from a sociological perspective, you know, now that you've, you know, Unplugged is over 30 years old at this point, and, you know, that tour is over 30 years old. When you sort of look back at that sort of moment in time in your life, was it, oh, I'm just trying to sort of play these gigs and do right by these gigs in this band? Or were you able to sort of, and again, maybe this is sort of what I was getting at with my question earlier, sort of go, wow, there really is something, and I don't mean Kurt Cobain, I don't mean the sort of Nirvana thing, but just that, oh, there's something happening in music, art, and culture that is really interesting and fascinating. Was that sort of, were you thinking about that at the time, or?
No, not at all. I don't think so, no.
Was it just, so were these just sort of, and I don't mean to diminish it, but were these sort of like, again, this is, okay, this is a job I have to do, these are, you know, the songs I have to play. Was that sort of the mindset in terms of your discipline of doing those shows?
Yeah, I mean, they were really famous. I mean, there was a lot of scrutiny, or, you know, a lot of people. I did it for a lot of people, but
you say
no,
that
I mean, because I mean, just I don't know, you just kind of go.
Yeah, you're a musician.
Yeah, get hired. I'm working. It's my job, and I go do my job and try to do a really good job. What do they need, and you know, how can I provide that as best I can? And
but you say that whole experience got you, that you did it the other way around, that got you into rock. Are you still into rock?
Yeah, I mean, I liked rock. I mean, I listened to rock before. It wasn't like I was sitting around listening to Brahms only or whatever, but I liked rock, and I went to rock shows. And I had friends who were in bands, and I sometimes sat in with bands before that. But I did, I kind of got more and more into rock, I would say. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I play with bands, and I have tons of friends in bands and listen to bands. Yeah, I mean, and that's also part of it's like, I mean, it's still, you know, it's a rock and roll town. Like, that's what's happening here. Like, that's really where it's at here normally.
And I guess me asking you that is coming from being a European, where rock is not European the same way it is American, and I'm quite not surprised, but I'm it makes me curious about you, since I bought, like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 of your albums in the past 12 years now, And I've seen you've had a lot of your work has been in Europe in these past few years. Like you've had a
Yeah.
lot of opportunities there, lots of collaborations there, lots of like even another almost unlikely like big mainstream one, which is releasing a record on Ed Banger, which is not as big as it used to be like 10 years ago, but
Mhm.
when you did it, it was kind of the epitome of youth culture back then, and you you managed to be there as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. You know, I'm really lucky. I don't like things just kind of like I keep really busy and I play all the time, and then a lot just kind of things drop into my lap. It has nothing to do with me understanding anything about Ed Banger and getting in touch with them or anything like that.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
that
yeah.
was yeah. You know, I mean, I don't have a very good sense of like business or orienting towards power or money, but I have really good luck and I have really good intuition, and I have like I'm very good at serendipity. So I've just kind of leaned into that because at some point I was just like, I'm not gonna turn into some kind of business genius unless I get like a complete personality transplant. So I'm just gonna lean into like I just play and trust the music, and things come from that.
And I guess that's what's really cool about you is that every time you put a record out, I don't know what to expect. I honestly
Yeah,
don't.
it's been a struggle for me actually, and kind of a goal to try to like put out like sort of leave a little breadcrumb trail to um, help define like the full shape of what I've been doing. You know, that's been a kind of a goal and a struggle. So often if I put something out, it's like, okay, what of the things that I'm doing, what hasn't been what hasn't been recorded yet on an album. So
The only thing I think I kind of expect, and you kind of maybe gave a sort of explanation to that, having been follow the teaching of Stuart Dempster. I would say I kind of expect, if I expect anything from you, it would be something along those lines, something that would stem out of the ideas you would find in his music, Pauline Oliveros' music.
he has such a nicer personality than I have. He is really chill. I am not that chill. He's a really
You're all right.
genuinely chill person, and I am only partially chill. So I don't know if I uh, maybe over time
But you're
I'll get
starting to
there.
have you've been building a body of work now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I put a lot of records out. Yeah, yeah, like solo or duo or stuff that I was in charge of. I think there's 17 albums. So yeah, it's a lot. Yeah.
But do you
I
have,
still have so many in the can. If you know anybody with a good record label, I have piles
yeah,
and piles. Yeah.
we'll
I
talk
have to
more
get some
about
more
that.
out. I have to, because also I play so much. So then I'm like, when I'm home, I was like, oh, I have to edit all this stuff, whatever, you know. So I always feel like I'm playing catch up, but I have a lot of stuff in the can.
I
Which
do
is
have to
interesting.
ask. I do have to ask one question, and again, I mentioned the one of the newest records earlier, Open Space.
Not to cut you off, but we're at almost an hour 40, and I need to go
Yeah.
momentarily. So.
Just for, and I know this is one of your newest records, and maybe this is a way to sort of tie everything together. Open Space, the name itself really kind of lends the listener to kind of not necessarily expect what to hear, but once you're really deep into that recording, there is a lot of open space on that recording. I read a little bit about sort of the ideas that you had with that recording, but can you just talk a little bit about that newest release and sort of how that came about?
Yeah, I had this recording that I made for a film that I think isn't actually going to get put out, but I had been talking with somebody, and I just don't like loose ends, really. So there was kind of this like, oh yeah, it'd be great to work together, and I have this one thing. So then I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. I'll just go bring me the film. We'll go to the recording studio, and I'll just make a soundtrack. So I just like got the laptop, set it out in front of me, and I went to Mel Detmers, and I just watched the film and played with it for whatever it is, 70 minutes or something, and and then we mixed it. That was it. So and I, obviously I had it pretty clear in mind, like the kind of approach I was going to take. I wasn't sure exactly how it was going to manifest, but I had a pretty clear idea about it. And then afterwards, and I've done a lot of playing with live film, so I have a lot of experience doing it like that, and it's like not a difficult amount of time for me to play. Also, because it was very sustainable, because there was like a lot of distortion and feedback, whatever. So in a way, it's not like I don't have to like grind out, every single sound. Like some of it's sort of happening on its own with the amplifier, between the amplifier and the instrument. And then afterwards, he said, he was like, oh yeah, I really have to edit that because I saw that there's some people at the end, and so then I realized I hadn't even edited it. Like I was so dumb. I was just kind of like, all right, yeah, sure, you got a film, I'll play for it, And I mean, I don't think he was I don't know if I told him or not, that he was just that I was just gonna sit down and do it. And then my other friend, who had sort of match made us, had gone to like get coffee or something like that, and he was stuck outside. Fortunately, I think the weather was not that bad. He was stuck outside because the door to the outside was where I was tracking, so he couldn't get. So he was. It's really beautiful at Mel's house. So there's like trees and a creek or whatever. So he was stuck in the backyard until I finished for 70 minutes until I was done tracking, but. Because I was just like, yeah, I don't know. I just don't. I hate those kind of loose ends, where it's oh yeah, we should work together. It was like, yeah, let's do it. Yeah, I'll do it right now. You know what I mean? Like I just hate that feeling. There's already a lot of loose ends. It's nice if you can control them. Or there's one you can just do and be finished and just be finished. Like have done it or whatever. So it was kind of like
and not thinking about what might have.
Yeah, right. Or just have this weird, I don't know, people just say like, oh, you should come over sometime. Or they're like, I would never say that to somebody if I didn't want them to come over. But people just say it, you know what I mean? But it just really rubs me the wrong way. Like, so, and then it was a kind of an album that it was a kind of recording I'd wanted to do. I'd been thinking about it a lot for a while. So.
Yeah, it's a very good record. And
thank you. Yeah.
To the people watching, it's on Relative Pitch Records, which is, like I said earlier, one of my favorite experimental labels.
Yeah, he's wonderful. Yeah, he's really amazing.
And it's funny, he puts out so much.
Yeah,
but it's all quality. It's all
he's
like
really
It's
really
very interesting.
Yeah, he's an amazing person.
But I encourage anybody watching this that is into the kind of music Stunty plays weekly. This is right up their alley. And I highly recommend. And it's only available on CD. I know that a lot of Stunty viewers are vinyl people, but I encourage you to buy the CD or stream it. Buy it particularly because I think that would better. But no, it's a great record. And
thanks
I've been listening to it since July. He tends to send me promos, and I saw that name come up, and I was like, oh, Laurie's putting out a release on your label. And there was as soon as he sent it to me, I listened to it right away. It's a very, very good record. Very good record.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah,
Laurie, I know you've it's like you were very generous with your time. Also that it's not necessarily like the ideal time. You had some stuff happening recently that made it even more special for us that you agreed to do that.
Thanks. Yeah.
And I don't think you've heard yet, but as I'm 10 hours ahead of you or something like that, it's already starting to boom, 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 because we're recording this on the New Year's Eve. And Sean and I are gonna stay to talk a few things about a few threads that we had in mind that we want to do it anyways. But yeah, we really thank you for stopping by. And
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it was really nice conversation.
Yeah, and I just want to say, as a fan and a nerd, this is the only time I will. I've nerded out, but I know that we're about to wrap up.
I'm sorry to break it to you.
What's nerdy about like fans?
I with all these records and stuff behind me, but I do want to say, Laurie, and I meant what I said earlier. Your work outside of Nirvana, which again, I don't want to lessen your work with Nirvana, but your work outside of Nirvana is what is really, as I get older, is what is attractive. It's like, that was sort of the gateway to get me to know who you are. But I think, again, like, you know, the Open Space record, or the record you did with Greg, you know, and
thanks,
the High and Low record
is amazing. The one on 51.
Thanks.
I mean, and I will say, like, there are some records you've done that I'm not as excited about. It's fine to have a hierarchy, and as we were saying before we went recording, one of the cool things about having grown up with a band like Nirvana, Sean and I, is that I think it taught us a lot more about critical judgment than other types of rock bands. We don't need to have all the bands of a band, or all the records of a band we love. And I think that what's pretty cool about this is that, as Sean said it, Sean and I, we don't listen to Nirvana anymore. And yet we feel a need to talk about it because of everything it brought us, and which is why we're talking together today.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
I mean, Sean still listens to them a little more than me, but
I do. I do. I said, you know, Nirvana does mean a lot to me, but I think I speak for Stunty too, and I just, again, thank you, Laurie, for the work that you've done, and
thanks so much.
And I'm really excited to it. Do you have anything else coming out next year that we should be looking out for?
There's
next year is tomorrow.
Anything that's like really nailed down. So I'll have to keep you posted. There's a bunch of stuff in the works.
We'll do that.
Thank you. All right, thanks a lot.
Right.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thanks again.
Have a nice,
great
Happy New Year.
New Year's Eve. Happy New Year.
Yeah, enjoy.
Et voilà, Sean.
That was super interesting. You know, it does really put into context, sort of, you know, I think there's a lot of sort of mythology that has happened with Nirvana and the things that surround Nirvana, and it's nice to talk to somebody that sort of puts things in sort of reality, you know.
That's like, of course, like at times like it was nice to see just a regular working musician talking about it as, of course, an inspiring experience, but also like not necessarily way more than any others meetings she had with all these musicians I named in the very beginning of the video. And in a way that some people might find that a little bit disappointing, but that's exactly what we like about it and what makes it special to us. How Nirvana for us kind of told us the truth. He was kind of like opening the curtain and letting us see what is behind, which is there is reality. It's not this whole MTV thing that we grew up with telling us about, like shiny objects. Not to say that it's dark and gloomy, but that it's real and real life.
yeah, I think that's, and not to, because I know part of what, we're doing with this conversation, and I know we didn't really get to talk about it too much, but, noise as psychedelic music, or even Nirvana as sort of this, because the reality of Nirvana is they're a band that is at this point going on a 40-year-old band. They obviously don't exist anymore, but, they started in 87, right? Give or take. And
yeah, they existed 7 years.
Yeah, and so, and it, you look at, I hate to bring this band up, but I think it.
And, Sean, they existed 7 years, but they only existed like 3 years in the public eye.
Right, and so I think what I'm sort of getting at with this point is, if you take a band like the Beatles, they also had a quote unquote short period of time.
10 years.
But Nirvana had, like, to your point, if you talk about it from a mainstream perspective, have had 3 years, a little less than 3 years, right? Because think about it.
Nevermind came out in late 91. Yeah.
91, September 91. And basically the European and Euro tour stops in February of 94.
Yeah.
So that's less
2
than
years
4
and a half. 2 years and a half.
Yeah, it's really not that long. And of course, Nirvana will never sort of, for better or worse, I think for better, will never have sort of the kind of cornball knowledge that some Beatles fans like to sort of project. And if you love the Beatles, I love the Beatles, they're great.
Me too.
Great. But I actually like the fact that there isn't that sort of history there, that what you and I are talking about goes beyond Nirvana, right? Like, Nirvana was that flashpoint, but I think our interests lie now way past what Nirvana was in 91, 92, 93. And that, to me, is what makes Nirvana still interesting. That's why, to me, it's still worth going back to those records, or looking up Kurt's favorite, like, 50 records, because I can always find a different thread, when I really sort of put my head down and do the research that I just never knew before. You know what I mean? And so that's what made that conversation super interesting to me, because there are connections that I was able to make that I don't even think I was able to make before talking to Laurie. And now it's just like, wow, what an impactful band Nirvana was. I'm not even talking about musically. I just mean from a cultural perspective. And I don't mean, Smells Like Teen Spirit. I mean, like, culturally.
It's interesting because, like, I remember back then, like, the people dissing Nirvana was mostly like the usual trope would be, oh, he can't even play the guitar that good, which means that was the very last remnants of an age that was dying, that they killed. Because, like, what the people who would say that fail to realize is that, as Laurie is a multi-instrumentist, she's an artist. At one point, she uses that instrument. Some other time, she uses another one. She's a cellist, but she also plays with pedals, which are in themselves instruments. What I mean to say is that obviously the noise aspect in Nirvana is really almost unheard of in pop music. But if you would be, if you're 15 and you with your friends having a party outside by a lake or in a house or wherever, and someone has a guitar and you play a Nirvana song, what are you playing? You're not playing the guitar parts. You're playing the melody that Kurt is singing.
Yeah.
And he has a very distinctive voice. And as the MTV Unplugged highlighted even more, he was doing amazing stuff with his voice, which was why it was also interesting to hear Laurie say that he was saying that he needed to stop singing like that because it was unsustainable.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's public knowledge. I've never researched Nirvana. I just listened to the music and make up my own feelings
That
and ideas about it. But
so
like it was,
that trajectory has been pretty well documented that he wanted to. I mean, I don't know if you heard about this, but this has also been he actually said it in an interview, I believe. He wanted to, with In Utero, he wanted 3 different versions of In Utero, right?
yeah.
And he wanted like the Albini mix, the sort of regular mix that we got, and then he wanted this mix. It wasn't even a mix. He was going to take a boombox of In Utero and put it up against a mic and just play the cassette and just distort it and then release that as like that's like the real version of In Utero. You know what I mean? So there's these when I think about stuff like that, and I hear Laurie talk about, you know, it's really interesting too, because, you know, to what you're sort of getting at, I think that Nirvana really was, or Kurt really was, reaching for something more. And I think that what Laurie said really underscores, even though it's sort of been talked about before, it underscores the idea, and it really is sort of fact, that at some point Nirvana was going to shed the quote unquote noise, or the quote unquote grunge, or whatever.
You know, that example, the thing about the boombox, first thing that pops into mind is Alvin Lucier. I'm sitting in a room. Like, that's a very similar idea, like, of distortion, natural, like acoustic distortion of something that exists perfectly, or supposedly perfectly, from an academic viewpoint. I remember, I think it was probably around 93, there was a French composer in Paris who did a piece at the Cartier Foundation, which is an art foundation square building with different rooms, and he basically did he had different guitar players placed in different spots, and they all played a part, like written music. So, and they were not together, they were scattered around there. So every time you would just move your head like that, you would perceive the piece completely differently, because the sound sources were from all directions. And obviously the only guitar players who you know replied, who accepted to be part of that, were guitar players from the underground punk rock scene in Paris. All of them, like literally all of them. I knew some of them later, but it shows that, like, the value of inventing stuff yourself, in the sense that maybe it already exists, like what Laurie is doing with pedals and all that. You can trace that back from the days of La Monte Young and all these people in New York. But if you don't know about it, like Kurt Cobain was probably not aware of Alvin Lucier when he had that weird idea. But the philosophical ideas behind it, that must be the same in a way, in the sense that, unless he's just taking the piss. But
well,
obviously,
I think you know, I think that I don't know. I mean, he was clearly aware of experimental music. There is that 10-inch that he put out in 93, which is just harsh noise, just noise
the
guitar.
Tim Kerr 10-inch with William Burroughs,
yeah, and it's a super interesting. To me, it's, you know, yeah, it's not the most inventive sort of noise piece, but we have to remember contextually, like, when that comes out, I don't think In Utero is even out yet, so they're still in the throes of Nevermindism. You know what?
Like, even if you take the most cynical angle to that, which is kind of the reality, he promised Tim Kerr to do it. He basically owed him to do it, and he phoned it in. Like, he just did it quickly. Even if it's that, it's still not an innocent gesture, because even if he, you know, it's also like you have to remember that, like, he was still a young kid. He was in his mid-20s.
Yeah.
He doesn't have all the baggage and knowledge that we have now about music history. So of course, it's easy to say, "Oh, I just phoned it in," as a sort of self-defense mechanism. Like you try something, you're aware that there's this whole world of academia that's already done it, so it's kind of intimidating, and you can expect the judgment of others. Plus the fact that he's a fucking international rock star, so of course everyone is going to be aware of that, even the people who might understand that music.
I mean, that was recorded, if you think about it, it came out in 93, so it probably was recorded sometime in 92. And again, going back to what I just said, that's still in the throes of Nevermind at its absolute height. To me, again, I'm not trying to make that comparison, but I guess I kind of have to. People kind of say, well, Revolution Number 9, or Carnival of Light or whatever is the sort of the most radical things a sort of mainstream band has done. But I would make an argument, and of course, I'm kind of, it would only go so far, but I think like that 10-inch or the idea, because the other thing too with the In Utero boombox thing, he also wanted to start a record label, and he wanted to do field recordings of like, of some rough stuff that was going on in Seattle. He wanted to do like field recordings and like mix that with experimental music, and of course, I think he was saying that to impress certain friends of his at the time. But I don't necessarily think, I think if it really was presented to him, he probably would have done it. So what I'm sort of getting at, Stunty, is that I think, again, that 10-inch is not that great, but I think contextually,
it's fun. It's fun.
Contextually, it is a interesting mile marker between what was going on with Nevermind and the conversation we just had with Laurie. Because again, I think you can connect the through lines. And sure, maybe Kurt and Chris and Dave weren't aware of Laurie's sort of connections to Milford Graves or Terry Riley. But to your point, I think when people are thinking outside of the box, you don't necessarily need to have those reference points.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, right.
Spontaneity, in the sense that, like, okay, he wants to do field recordings, and like maybe he's like a bit like, boasting about it to make him sound or look more interesting than he actually is, which is kind of like in character anyways. But like one thing that we didn't get to tackle with Laurie is like, or kind of a little bit with the Americana and modern primitives, finger picking. Like I know that she's really like that. The Folkways label is very important to her, or I think I remember reading that to her musical and artistic mind, in a way, of basically being open to the idea of sound and music coming from any direction. Folkways had field recordings albums in the 50s. And I guess that idea was not as revolutionary in the 50s when the tools for recording were invented. Then it felt normal that you would investigate it. Then one form becomes dominant, rock and roll, pop music, and you kind of forget about it until you have some distance. And I guess that Kurt Cobain and maybe Chris, I don't know, we'll never know. I don't think we're getting access to Chris Novoselic anytime soon, but like I know that he's played the accordion, which you have some tunes in the 80s, like the Susie and the Banshees using accordion to great effect, but it's not coming from the, like, they were using it as a sort of like almost special effect. Like, of course they're using it because of doing something great musically with it, but it's also a huge contrast. And the way Chris Novoselic was using it, I think they were trying to connect it with culture that already existed. It was not just like, let's see how much we can fuck up we can fuck with this instrument that's not supposed to do. No, it was, I wouldn't say it was respectful, but it came with an idea of sort of linearity in culture, or maybe hopping, but like that history already exists, and I'm not gonna give history the middle finger. I guess it will be like, this is just speculation, obviously, but one of the things that, like, of course, Laurie, like, that's why we're still talking about it, and we intended it so anyways, because what is Laurie gonna say about the idea of like what happened after Nirvana, within Nirvana? Like, it's not, I guess she wouldn't feel it's necessarily her place to say it even, but like, when you see that Nirvana just grows and keeps innovating on their own scale, like, they're punk rockers. They're not like people who necessarily, and correct me if I'm wrong, even if when they add Pat Smears, who has, by then, he already has 15 years of experience, professional experience with music, releasing records since the late 70s with the Germs, etc. He's still probably a punk rocker.
And he was. What's interesting, and I didn't know this until recently.
Solo albums, but like, maybe you know more about it.
But before he was asked to join Nirvana, which I think Courtney was the one that facilitated that, Pat was working at SST in the warehouse. Like, you know what I mean? Pat was like, you know, I don't know if he was a lifer to be a lifer, but that's what he was. He was still working at like SST or something like that, you know. I mean, it's I think like the story goes, when the idea was
when, like, let's remember that not everyone knows the nerdiest aspects of the
I mean, I guess but the story does go that, like, when
just quickly say what SST is.
SST is a label that Greg Ginn started. Greg Ginn is the founder and I guess still the only member of Black Flag, because Black Flag for some reason still exists.
SST is just like one of the really legendary that like branched, that did stuff that was more towards experimental music as well.
Yeah, there's obviously you think of SST, you think of Black Flag, and all of that, but later on and towards the tail end, Greg Ginn was a little more experimental, kind of a self-proclaimed deadhead, which, all right. But no, so it's interesting though that Pat, from my understanding, that he was still working at SST, and I think the story goes, when the idea was presented to the band to maybe bring in Pat, or they did bring in Pat, Dave said something to the effect of like, he's still alive, you know what I mean? Like, it's like that just, and so just a side note, that guy is now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Pat Smear, he's in the so a Germs member is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and so it's just super interesting to me. But I think to kind of tie this all together, talking to Laurie, what's really sort of interesting about it was, and I kind of knew this going into it, but I think it's just really interesting to hear. There wasn't this sort of like, man, and then like everything just seemed like, they were just, Laurie and all of the people that she was connected to, they were just doing what they do as musicians, as artists. And whatever happened in Seattle at that particular point in time, it just happened. There wasn't, you know what I mean? And that doing sort of the research. But to hear that directly from somebody is super fascinating, and just goes to show that, the sort of the way that we see Nirvana, and it's true, they didn't necessarily go to the mainstream to an extent. They did sort of, I think, want to get signed. But the mainstream really did come to them, and to sort of connect everything together. I think that is one of the last times that we will see something like that from a major label perspective.
Like, is it them who wanted, or is it the industry? I think again, it's, and tell me, my take is, as I said it earlier, is that like reality course corrected reality, in the sense that culture needed that. It happened to be them who were the best incarnation of what we needed, or what mainstream global culture needed, which was like to readjust this paradox that we had of like that some people could be both the rebel and the popular, the jock
Well,
and the rebel at the same time. Like, it's in culture that was a cognitive dissonance.
I also think too, though, you had, you know, punk, but really 80s American hardcore, which I think in the last maybe 20 or so years has sort of finally got its quote unquote due in terms of like documentaries and stuff. But I think Nirvana, you know, again, what you're sort of getting at in Nirvana, of course, right place, right time, all of that, everything that we already know about that narrative. But I think it needs to be said over and over again that if it wasn't for 80s hardcore, you know, particularly, again, speaking about SST and Black Flag and all of that, if it wasn't for that sort of groundwork, and I don't necessarily mean musically, I just mean culturally, touring wise, and all of that stuff, you don't have Nirvana. And I think, to your point, I think eventually that would have, I don't know if there would have been a band as impactful, but I think that was coming to a head, and Nirvana just happened to be that band that wanted to get signed. They're the reason. Like, Kurt is the reason why Sub Pop didn't go under, and not because Nirvana sold a lot of records. He forced Sub Pop to sign a contract. He forced them to. I don't, you know, if it wasn't for Kurt, I don't know if we'd be talking about Sub Pop much. And I don't mean because of Nirvana. I just mean forcing them to sign a contract.
But it's, I mean, again, I think when I say right place, right moment, right person, it's not to diminish the talent. Like, again, like there were other bands who were in the same zeitgeist. Nirvana happened to be probably the best melodists of them all, and also to look the most approachable. They looked like nice guys. They looked like guys you could go and ask them for a cigarette on the street or whatever. I mean, if you look at like the Melvins, they didn't look exactly the same way. If you look at Sonic Youth, they were like more like intellectual, less approachable, and some looked less. I mean, the Screaming Trees, they looked not as nice. Even if you take something like Dinosaur Jr., they looked, I'm sorry to say, they looked more like junkies than Nirvana.
Well, I will say this, you know, that was the attractiveness when I was 9, seeing Smells Like Teen Spirit, not just musically, but they dressed like my dad sort of, again, I grew up sort of lower middle class, really blue collared. So my dad had ripped jeans and had had clothes that just were tattered and ragged because we didn't have a lot of money. And all of the bands that he was into, though, minus like the Ramones, but all the bands that he was into were like dressed to the nines or like dressed crazy, you know. So for me to see Nirvana at that particular point in time when I was like 9 years old, I was like, oh, like they look like my dad, or they look like somebody that I like, to your point, that they're super approachable, you know. And I think that that sort of gets lost in the sauce a little bit too, is I think that they looked like just regular people.
And again, they had nice faces. They not nice in the sense that they looked like models or anything. They just looked like nice guys, like with smile, like a little bit baby face, a little bit, and
they look like guys that they just seem like normal people. I mean, they were
nice.
Yeah,
normal,
just
nice.
Yeah, there wasn't this
whatever was happening in their life. I mean, if you think about it, the most eccentric thing that happened to their look was sometimes some color in the hair and some goofy sunglasses. That's it. Nothing. That's literally the culmination of them trying to look different than they look in everyday life.
I mean, and going back to, and I think again, what you were saying is, the thing about Nirvana that's super interesting to me is it gave me this sort of idea of like, it is okay to critique, to say something like sucks or something isn't quite up to snuff. I think that's, as sort of people that are, whether you digest music or art or culture or you make it, the thing that we're sort of missing right now is like actual critique, because everybody's so afraid to, say how they really feel. Or you get the opposite end, which is just trolling instead of actually having like something to that has weight, something that you could say. And so I think like what Nirvana sort of taught me is that like, oh yeah, like it's okay to have a certain sort of like level of things that need to reach that for you to appreciate it. You don't need to like just unnecessarily like everything, like really sort of think about it, really like take a breath for a minute and be like, is this really great? Is this really good? Or is this just kind of okay?
Yeah, it's kind of like what it does, what that did, instead, I'd rather say, than they did, is that this whole like classic rock, now boomer culture, which is fine, but that tends to love hierarchy. Nirvana and that kind of music really is about breaking the class society of like, I'm gonna say what I think, even if it's not my place to say. Not as you say, not for trolling, but just because you still have that liberty, and they were taking it.
Yeah, I think cynicism is a good thing to have.
I don't think it's cynicism. I don't think it's that. I think it's
but I think that
freedom. I think it's freedom.
Sure. No, and I understand what you mean by it, but I think that from a surface level perspective, people look at cynicism as if like it's something super negative. And if you live in that world, of course, again, that's where you become the troll, right? But I think having a little bit of cynicism or having a little bit of like, I don't know, really works in your favor. And so I think that I'm speaking just for me, but people ask me sometimes like, how did you get into like so much different kinds of music? And I just was never satisfied with what I was hearing. I'm always looking for like something I've never heard before, something that is unattainable. And I think of that mindset comes from Nirvana being like, because it was really interesting to hear them in interviews like trash bands that needed to be trashed, like, and part of that too comes from like, Steve Albini world. But I think that was my gateway to that, you know what I mean? And it led me to sort of the Steve Albiniism, for better or worse.
Musicians trashing other musicians, I guess, has always existed though.
Sure. But I think it's such a blatant way of like saying this is us versus them.
Yeah, but you said like they needed to be trashed, and you're not saying that because you have any coin one way or another. It's just that there needed to be a sort of course correction on culture.
Yeah, there always does, right? There always needs to be young people burning down, even if it's just temporary, these sort of like mythical figures, which is why I'm really glad in a certain way that Nirvana only had 2.5, 3 years in the mainstream, because we're not getting railroaded by, and look, to an extent, Nirvana is somewhat guilty of this, but we're not getting railroaded by reissues to an extent. And you could make an argument that the In Utero box is a little bit too much, but that because there isn't anything left in the vault with Nirvana, there really isn't. Like there's a bunch of Kurt solo stuff that I think Courtney has held on to, but that's just like demos and stuff like that. And so what we've got, it didn't take 40 years to get everything we've got. We got that in a very short span.
You know what? Also, as we said, the fandom, or the basically the culture of the people who enjoy Nirvana from back then is not the same as the people who enjoyed the Beatles in the 60s and 70s. These people, they love the Beatles. We love the music. We don't care about. I personally, yeah, if it's interesting, if it brings some new meaning, but like I don't personally like the day. I'm sorry to say, the day Chris Novoselic is dying, I'm probably not gonna shed a tear. Like it's not gonna affect me one way or another. His music, that's a different thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think sure, I'd be sad if anybody.
Yeah, but like
in the
building
Nirvana
connections
camp
with people you've never met.
I think that the only thing that Kurt really taught me as I get older is just be yourself and do what you need to do to make yourself happy. And which is what Kurt unfortunately never really got to sort of do, it seems like. And so, but I don't have the sort of, it's always good to hear stories that Kurt was just a normal guy or Kurt wasn't this way. And what you're hearing is actually just mythology. You know, like it's nice to know that like, yeah, like these are just normal people. And there really isn't that much of a myth to this. Like talking to Laurie, and I think it's, again, this sort of will bring everything together. It's like Laurie is a working musician.
Yeah.
She worked with the biggest fucking band in the world.
Yeah.
And and I mean this as a compliment, the way that she handles herself and the way that she handles her art, you would never know that. Because she's a working musician that cares about music, that cares about the output that she's putting in the world. There's not a lot of musicians, I think, that would have that sort of pedigree that would keep a level head like that.
But like, could they work with anyone? I mean, now we don't know because it ended But like, would it have been sustainable if it had been with anyone that was more starstruck or more into the Nirvana now? Probably not, but we'll never know. One thing though that now it's a bit nerdy, but like since you alluded to that, I think, as I said, that it was the zeitgeist. They were the best to incarnate it. If it hadn't been them, if they hadn't existed, what are the other bands from back then that you think would be the closest? And I have an answer to that, and I think it's quite interesting that, in my opinion, by 94, they start to be shit as far as I'm concerned, because it's the end of that thing as well. And it's Pavement.
Yeah, I think that there's an argument there for Pavement, maybe there wasn't.
Pavement they kind of started not far after. I think they probably their first releases were like 89.
They had kind of like dug their roots with the right people, right? You're putting out records on like Silk Breeze, and you're making connections with Sonic Youth relatively early.
But besides that,
but I think that their music.
It's noise, melodic, it's energy. They look normal.
They do, but I will say this: I think contextually, you look at what was going on between 90 and 92. Pavement didn't really see from a musicality perspective or whatever. Maybe we're even more interesting. I'm not a big Pavement guy. I like the worst Pavement album, Terror Twilight, which is the album everybody seems to hate. But I will say this: I think that Nirvana, though, because all of those dudes, really minus Chris, I think, I think all of them come from blue collar divorced homes. You could feel that and hear that in the music. And I don't necessarily think that you get that with Pavement. And I don't know if that would have connected in the same way.
Yeah, but you know what? Now we know all of that about where they come from, but we didn't know that back then. We didn't. Like I had no idea. I had some idea with Nirvana for some other reason, but like the Pixies, Pavement, Soundgarden, all that. I had no idea their respective background. Sonic Youth
Yeah,
only
yeah.
recently have apparently they all come from well-educated and bourgeois background.
I think that would have come through fairly early on had one of those bands, let's say it's Pavement, taken the place of Nirvana. I think that there is because remember, and we were kind of sort of inching in that direction with Laurie a little bit. Besides sort of there was a self-awareness that, for better or worse, in the last 10 or 15 years has really been crapped on. There's I think a lot of younger people and even millennials that have been like, oh, like, I think, Gen X really cared too much about selling out and being so self-aware. But think about the political landscape that we're in. It's like every band now, they sell out. It's not selling out. They just sell their music or their art to anybody that wants to buy it.
Yeah, just being on Spotify is selling out in that regard.
Sure, yeah. And I think that a band that sort of just nonchalantly is okay with that. For the last 10 years or so, I've heard younger people or even millennials say, oh man, like, I don't care about selling out. Like, I think we care too much about that. I'm sorry, but to me, selling out still matters. That's not old man yells at cloud. That's like, no, that's selling your music and your art to really crappy corporations.
Well, but there's something that you forget in the equation, which is something I learned when suddenly music was my main income, when it was my job full time, which is that it is your job as well. When you manage to come to the position where it is your main, if not only,
that's what you want it to. That's what you want it to be, right? And so I think, to your point,
no. That's, as Laurie was saying here actually earlier. It's not necessarily that you want to be it; is that you don't have such a definite, like, the kind of musicians we're talking about. Like, imagine if Kurt had been given a really good civil servant job with good pay.
Well, look, let's not beat around the bush here. It's very much well-known knowledge that Kurt in 93 renegotiated the royalty rights and actually took more royalties, because it was split equally 3 ways originally. And I think around 93, Kurt demanded that he get, I think, 2/3 of the royalties or something like that. And so I'm not here to say that, and Nirvana was on a major label, right? Like, Nirvana was on DGC. I'm not at all trying to be a purist about that here. I understand exactly what you're saying, but I think that there is.
What are you saying? They were on Sub Pop.
Wow. Which again, if it wasn't for Kurt forcing Sub Pop to sign that contract, we would never see that.
I get your point, but like, get mine in the sense that, like, see Pavement, for example, their third album, Wooey Zooey, which back then was not universally loved. Not. Now it is, but that's the album where they put slide guitar, they improve, like, or they experiment with recording techniques and all that. And then the next album is the equivalent of an American Britpop album in a way. It's fine, but when you got like songs like Cut Your Hair, like, and of course they soon fade after that because that's not who they were. The music might be great, like, I'm not debating it, I don't like it, but like, it might be great still, but culturally it's not there anymore. Like, what they represented and what they grew up as and into, being rock stars, is not that. So you can force it for a little while. Now, of course, it's easy when you make the parallel with Nirvana that we don't know what happened after, and we will never know. Or we have some clues, like we have the intentions Kurt voiced, but we also have the path of the Foo Fighters, which, in my opinion, is a great step backwards. Not saying that it's bad. I personally don't like it, but I also think that, as you and I have discussed, that Nirvana was touching on something on the zeitgeist, and the zeitgeist is not local. It's at that point, it's universal. It's worldwide. I think that the Foo Fighters is an American band.
Yeah, Foo Fighters, they're a machine. I mean, this is.
They're also, the music they're doing is more rooted in the in rock and roll.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think every album out after that first record, and again, I really like that first record, and you and I have had this discussion many times. I like, the first Foo Fighters record. The second one's pretty good, but I think that what the Foo Fighters sort of represented was, to me, it was kind of like, well, I went through this really traumatic experience. What do I need to do to never to guard myself from that again? And the Foo Fighters are they are this sort of interesting representation of post-Nirvana cynicism, negativity, in a way that's almost like overcorrection, right? Like the Foo Fighters almost overcorrected for Nirvana, and it was, and we're, we kind of like are starting to realize that now in terms of certain things politically, you know what I mean? There's been these like overcorrections of certain things, and now it's like, oh, maybe we went too far, or whatever. And I think the Foo Fighters are a good representation of overcorrection.
I think that, like, as we discussed privately, Nirvana was improving record after record. How long could that have been sustainable? Maybe not more than the course it ran. There's good intelligence to think that, and the Foo Fighters are kind of an example of that. Like what I said about Pavement is kind of an example of that. How long can you keep being the underdog when you're the biggest figure in pop culture? It's like basically what they managed to get rid of from the 80s. They structurally were becoming the norm. People, as Laurie was saying, and as we know, people moved to Seattle hoping that they would kind of catch some of the magic or the street cred or whatever. So,
well, what's funny is, so we, part of it, obviously Laurie, she's known for being, part of the Unplugged session. And there's a video that I think MTV took of people outside waiting in line before they got into the venue for Unplugged. And they asked somebody in line, they were like, do you think that, if this show goes well, that Nirvana should release this Unplugged thing as a CD? And the guy flat out just says, nope, I don't think they should. Like, this was like minutes before he walked into the venue, right? We now know like what Unplugged became. But
I was saying, I felt the same back then.
Yeah, no, that's what I was sort of getting at. It was a very interesting like take on it, because at that particular point, he hadn't even like witnessed what was about to happen. And he was already saying like, this is not going to work out. And I think you would, like, when you heard about it, you were probably like, there's no way that could be interesting,
Oh, no, it would be. Yeah, exactly. I thought like, okay, this will satisfy all people who need it to be like cleaned out and yeah.
And it's interesting because then again, like, we don't know. It sounds like Kurt wanted to take aspects of that and really sort of, though, push it maybe from a minimalist perspective.
I'll tell you what, though, what I think is that the cyclic appeal of Nirvana from the start up until and including In Utero, obviously that was going to be gone from an Unplugged and from the sanitizing of MTV back then. So the subversion what makes it really great is that the cyclic noise aspect, he managed to sneak it in with his voice, with his singing. That's where it still is.
Yeah, no, and I think that you're 100% right about that, because whatever would have happened next with Nirvana, or whether Kurt would have gone solo, I mean, that's not necessarily super interesting to me. But to your point, what is interesting is
just quickly, and the fact that back then, having a cellist like Laurie for music like that was actually disruptive, more than we realized back then.
Oh yeah, which is why I wanted to, what do the young people say, show her flowers, because I think that ultimately, and I know that she wasn't selling herself short, but she, to me, again, I got to reiterate, to most people, sure, she may be a footnote, but for you and I, she's not. You know what I mean? Like, there is.
I mean, she kind of is, but like.
But yeah, from a Nirvana perspective.
Oh no, yeah, exactly. She's not. From a Nirvana perspective, she is correct, even though like it was a paradigm shift for them as well, since like a lot of people were ready, like myself back then, to just like say goodbye because of stuff like that, and we didn't even give it a fair chance back then.
Yeah, and I think that, again, looking back at the conversation we just had with her, and sort of now thinking about what we sort of discussed and what we're discussing now is, again, there's not going to be this sort of industry with, I have to keep making the comparison, but there's not going to be this sort of industry with Nirvana to the extent that we get with the Beatles. There just isn't, because there isn't enough material for that to sustain itself. But what I think is going to keep Nirvana in people's minds outside of a freaking t-shirt is that Kurt, all of them were reaching for something more. They really, and to what you were saying, I think you're right. Every album seemed to be a progression, a better progression of what was before it, and that's a rarity with any, which is part of the reason why I think you and I both, we're both kind of the same way. We don't collect all the discography of a singular band or artist, because there are just things that are just not worth having. And, you know what I mean? Like, I don't need.
I have two exceptions that you know of. But
I know. I know. And I like, I have some exceptions too. I mean, part of it is like Morbid Magus. They have such a limited discography that it's easy to really dive into that. But I think for the most part, 95% of artist bands, you don't need to own their whole discography, because a lot of it has stinkers.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying Nirvana didn't have stinkers in terms of songs, or songs that are less.
I'll be honest with you. Nowadays, even if I discovered them with that, as I said, I don't listen to Nirvana that often, because firstly, the bands that I don't have that many albums that I love, I don't need to listen to them. I already listen to them that much. It's in the DNA.
Well, it's funny. I don't follow the VC world, but I will say the one topic that has been in my feed is Beatles burnout. I've gotten a couple of videos on that, which is why I think there isn't a Nirvana burnout, because I don't listen to them.
There's another reason for that, though. But I'll tell you that in a second. I was just meaning that, like, for me, I would say that if I had to start today again and all records were the same price, I don't think I would even get Bleach. I know some people say that it's their favorite album of theirs. I don't think it's a great album. I'm very happy I grew up with it, but
it's a Melvins record.
Yeah,
I mean, I think their best record for a lot of people, I think, is, and it's not really even a record, is Incesticide. I know a lot of people that think Incesticide is like their most abstract work. It's like, their most experimental work.
About the Beatles fatigue and the lack of Nirvana fatigue, I think is because there's many reasons for that. But one aspect that I'm not sure I've ever heard anyone mention that, and I never thought about it until now, is that the people who grew up with the Beatles grew up in a time of economical prosperity. there are the people who kind of feel weird when I tell them that nostalgia is the enemy. They might have reasons to be nostalgic. Our generation doesn't have as many reasons to be nostalgic as them. So you see where I'm going with it? Like the nostalgia of in the Beatles fandom, yeah, sure, everything was great back then for them. For us, the reason we loved Nirvana was partly because everything was fucked. So why should
that's what I mean by That's what I mean by the cynicism. I don't necessarily mean it in a negative way. I mean, I think that, and then to what I was getting at with, you know, Laurie and I talking about the when New York Times called the Sub Pop office, it's just I'm glad that I grew up in a time where self-awareness and irony actually mattered. You know what I mean? Where like you could have these conversations outside of like 140 characters or whatever social media platform gives you. You know, irony is important. Self-awareness is important. And I think that there's something that's lost right now. And I think that having a sense of cynicism is healthy. I really genuinely do. And so that's why, like, to me, it's like, you know, Nirvana is great, but also fuck Nirvana. Like, there's so much good music out there. Like, it's so, which is, again, not to get on a soapbox, is why I don't involve myself in the quote unquote VC, because most people don't care about new music. I sent you my list. There's over 80 new records on that thing. Like, and I could have made it 120 more. Like, look at Thurston Moore's freaking list. His was like 350.
That's stupid, but that's stupid.
Yeah, I mean that is like, you know,
totally. What was it? 350 records or
350 records. His number one record is actually really, really good. It's his Harpsist that, like, I meant to grab that 10-inch when it came out, and I totally dropped the ball. Now it's probably going to be impossible.
You gave me a great transition for, like, there was a sort of discussion point that we started with Laurie, or I tried to start, about rock and roll. And like, since she's told us that her journey was unconventional towards rock and roll, and I asked her if she was still into it, because she could have, you know, she's had a long journey, so it could have like eroded. You know me, I'm a European liberal, which means communist for you, atheist, humanist, who's into always trying to look forward in music. My favorite record of the year.
I know this.
You know what it is?
I do know, because at the Snake Handler record. Yeah.
So when I think, because I went through the whole journey of rock and roll, now when I want to listen to rock and roll, I listen to Bo Diddley. There's nothing else I care about in rock and roll. In, like, philosophically, I would say. There's some rock that I still enjoy, but like, if you talk to me about rock and roll, I say Bo Diddley. This is the only stuff in 2025 that sounds to me like it's still connected to that, and it's religious fanatics.
I'm looking for a particular record.
But I'm just saying that, like, that record, the Snake Handler Revival, which is a field recording of a church in West Virginia, in the Appalachians, of snake handler churches where they play. I mean, you've listened to the record, right?
Yeah, it's Sublime.
It is pure rock and roll. It's just like a drum bass groove with the guy chanting about Jesus instead of sex. But it's kind of the same in a way, because that's where it started before Elvis Presley. Like the blues and rhythm and blues that were lifting from was either talking about women and drugs or about the Lord and Jesus.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned. I think I filed the record away, and the name escapes me right now. But there's a 12-inch that I heard about on a podcast. Ironically, I was working and I was listening to his podcast about Nirvana, but like a deep dive. And there's this band from Seattle. There's no drums, just like two guitarists playing like surf rock, but like repetitive surf rock. The name escapes me, and I'm sure I'll email you whatever it is. But it's really interesting, and but my point in bringing it up is it's so back to the elements of like there's no frills about it, right? There's no like pedals being used. There's nothing. It's just surf rock, like minimalist surf rock guitar. You know, that's it. No drums, just that it's very super lo-fi, but not because it's like cool to be lo-fi. It was like that's the essence of like rock and roll, right? You know what I mean? And so it's super interesting you talking about that record and like really thinking about like rock and roll as like rock and roll, you know what I mean? And not just this sort of like thing that we all like. Analyzing rock and roll is like what it is, like just, you know, is a really super interesting thing. And I think maybe that's what makes Nirvana also really interesting, is because it's really just drums, bass, and guitar. It's a phaser pedal. Like that's there.
And it's also avant-garde. And as I was mentioning, the futurists, like the noise, literally, like just to think about like the bonus, the hidden track on the Nevermind, like either you take it as a prank or as a sort of political, philosophical gesture. It can be both, because they're like 20 something. So how confident are they in themselves? They can be cocky, but like we know how it is to be that age and to be an artist, that there are some stuff that you want to do that you're not necessarily sure that you're good at it. Yeah, there are people who are gonna shit on you for doing it, so you might just, you know, say it's a prank or a joke, just to have an exit door, a possible exit door if people start to dump on you when you're doing it. I'm not saying that. I don't know what they said about that track. What was the name of that track again?
Endless Nameless.
Yeah. Which is.
I mean that is a pure, to me, that is avant-garde
music. Yeah, it is. It literally is, and that's why the intentions are quite obvious to me almost from the get-go. Like on Bleach, they could still hide it. Maybe they weren't there yet, probably. But like to think that like the most popular pop album of the 90s
you know, that's what I think is mind-blowing to me, which is what I was trying to express to Laurie. And I think, you know, for people that are in it, it's probably not, it doesn't, and I don't mean this in any negative way, but it may not resonate to her as much as it does to me, where it's like where I'm like, no, Nirvana name-checked Harry Pussy at a show in Florida. Like,
yeah, but you know what? Harry Pussy is still rock and roll.
Yeah,
like,
no, but I'm
nameless. Like, just think about it. Like that. For Laurie, who had studied music and all that, she knew, even if she was not only into that, she knew about La Monte-Young. She knew about stuff like that. When you're 9 and I'm 12 when Nevermind comes out, we have no fucking idea who La Monte-Young is, who Russolo, the Italian, is, who Nurse Witherspoon is, who Masami Akita is, who Glenn Branca is. We have no idea about that. That doesn't exist. That's not even in the periphery. So for us, that's when it starts. And they made it.
And by the way, just because I was like very curious, the album that I was talking about is by this band called the Smash Chords. It's a fairly cheap record, by the way. I got it for a pretty decent price, but I think people are starting to catch on to what it is. So I don't think there's really any there's one from the US that's like $26. But to your point, I mean, I think what I was really getting at when I mentioned the Harry Pussy thing is that Nirvana were way more experimental, even though, yes, Harry Pussy is a rock-ish band. Those reference points still resonate with me today. It's like, man, I can't believe a band like Nirvana name checked X, Y, and Z. I still blows my. There's a Nirvana show that was never recorded where it was just Kurt and a drum machine. I think Chris was there. They didn't have a drummer at the time. It's this weird noise drum machine show that they did, and it wasn't recorded, I guess, but it exists. They did it, and I don't know. I think that's sort of have that conversation with Laurie, and again, I think for her and I think the people in that scene for the most part, they were just living it, right? But I think you and I, as music connoisseurs and people that care about art, music, and culture, it's still mind-blowing to me that I can make those connections to Morton Feldman through.
I might be wrong there, but I seem to remember that Nirvana mentioned the Sun City Girls. They name-checked them.
I'm almost positive you're right. I think you're right.
Which is interesting, since this was released on Sublime Frequencies, the label of Sir Richard Bishop from the Sun City Girls.
Yeah, I think you know what? I think you're right. Kurt was one of those people too that, for better or worse, he would. I actually just Googled it. I think they may have played a show together.
Right.
It's rumored that because it looks in Arizona in '89 supposedly. This is just from what I'm seeing. It sounds the show was Sun City Girls, Crash Worship, and Nirvana.
Crash Worship. Wow.
Yep. Yeah. So this was pre, Nevermind, clearly, 89. Jason and Chad were still in the band. But Sun City Girls opened up for Nirvana.
Yeah.
That is a connection. I faintly remember that. But you bringing that up, and it's funny, you mentioned Sun City Girls. This just came in the mail the other day. It's the Paris 1942 LP, which is members of Sun City Girls and Mo from the Velvet Underground. Really solid. It's not anywhere close to being as good as Sun City Girls. Clearly not Velvet's.
But you know what that means is that you say that they name check that. It means that music, that scene, or that cultural bubble, in a way, it was a sort of bubble. When you were into music like that as a teens, or as the people who were doing it, you were kind of left alone. You had room to investigate without judgment or too much judgment. If you wanted to suddenly buy ethnomusicology records, no one would come to you and say that you're a loser or anything. The people who would call you that, they weren't even aware you existed, because you were in your own little world with the punk rock, indie, and all that. It was, and that's, I guess, why they could do it, name check these bands. By 94, it's more difficult, and maybe that's the reason why, it ends, because suddenly it's what they are is impossible to still exist. People have all these theories about what happened to Kurt Cobain, how he died, and all that. In the end, to his family it matters, but to us it doesn't really matter. What matters is that suddenly, to have that kind of freedom, well, you have to go to techno, to electronic.
I was literally just going to make that point, because I know how much electronic music and techno not means to you, but how influential that is to you. And I think that there's also a through line, Nirvana, to where you sort of ended up in terms of your output as a musician, sort of as what you're, and I mean this as a compliment, as sort of what you're pushing on your podcast. And I don't mean pushing as a negative thing. And I think all of that matters, in this conversation. And I think really, Stunty, what I'm sort of getting at, why I'm really glad we've had this conversation, why we had the conversation with Laurie, is, this is why music still matters to me. It's not the sort of mythical stuff. Some of that's really, interesting to an extent and whatever. But I think what's more interesting to me is that the fact that we just connected Sun City Girls to Nirvana. That's
and the snake handler.
Yeah, exactly, right? And it's just that is
from Stockhausen to this, and you have Nirvana in the middle.
I mean, it's not about a name. It's not a name check thing. It's not me being oh, we know, this super sort of avant-garde or experimental or underground music. I don't view it that way. I'm like, man, the biggest fucking band in the world name check Sun City Girls. That's the equivalent of the I guess the Beatles referencing, I don't know, who would be comparable to Sun City Girls.
No,
yeah,
it's the wrong example in the sense that they actually but
a lot of people seem to just sort of on the surface be like, oh yeah, what it would Stockhausen or John Cage.
It would be as if Madonna had name checked Patrick Coley.
Well, what's wild
they're even closer. They're quite close.
I mean, let's not forget Madonna for a moment in time dated the singer for Swans, Jira.
Oh yeah,
but, you know what I mean. So they, that's not that.
Yeah,
far
but
off.
as you said, Nirvana played with Sun City Girls, so it's not completely weird that they name check them.
Oh, it's not. It's just funny to me because for a lot of people, Sun City Girls and Nirvana have no connection. For a lot of it.
No, they're both indie punk rock.
Sun City Girls is just weird. Sun City Girls is on another trip.
It's called the Caroliners.
Wow, that is a reference that I think that may be the first time somebody in the quote unquote VC name check Carolina. That is, and I don't mean name check in a bad. I just mean I have some records from them that are in freaking plastic bags. It's just the way they package their records.
Oh yeah, the packaging of the Caroliners records is, I mean, for some people it would be the best thing about it. Because they hear the music, except that the packaging is horrible as well, even if it's cool.
Some of it is just what it's when Wolf Eyes would in the late 90s, early 2000s were doing the spray paint CDRs. It's eventually this is gonna suck, and it clearly a lot of those CDRs no longer work because the spray paint, it's just the way they were packaged. But I mean, the fact that you were able to mention them, and in the context of, to me, that is the sign of a band, strictly speaking about Nirvana, a band that really is influential outside of the myth.
Literally, I guess that 95% of all the artists that we name check, that we don't just name check, we have some context, hopefully, but that is literally the result of being exposed to Nirvana at a young age. And not some youth, not it could have happened from some other direction, but there was nothing as there. That's why I kind of put you in the ropes when you said that you discovered Nirvana in '91. Yeah, everyone discovered.
No, everyone did, and I don't. I wasn't, and I think that's. I'm glad you brought it up that way in the conversation, because I think that's a good representation of. To your point, I'm sort of giving you your flowers here a little bit, what you said earlier about, well, when you're a working musician, you've got to do certain things that I don't want to call them compromise, but maybe that's the case. Nirvana being on DGC is a compromise. To me, you really are selling out.
Okay, so let's
but I think without that, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah, and you can also make the point that DGC kind of exists thanks to Nirvana. It's not totally wrong, actually.
I mean, they kept going because of Nirvana, sure.
I mean, and also, would Nirvana have been able to do In Utero, Incesticide, and MTV Unplugged without the success of Nevermind, and would
No.
Nevermind have been successful the way it was without DGC?
No, I mean, no, and that's that, but almost equal parts, because of there's the mythology of the Sub Pop logo being on, those records. It does give credibility to that. Like there's
but to you, Sub Pop meant nothing when you were 9. It didn't exist. You had no idea what it meant on the cover.
No, but once I started reading the interviews, and it was around 11, I think, when I started kind of consciously understanding what, to an extent, what independent record labels were. Then it meant something to me. But no, you're right. At the time, when I'm 9 years old and I'm watching It Smells Like Teen Spirit on my parents' waterbed while they're working, and I'm, as somebody with a disability, I couldn't, I can't walk or anything like that, but I'd be on my hands and knees jumping up and down on my parents' bed trying to emulate what was going on in the video. But my point is, I just had no clue about it. Sub Pop didn't matter to me. You're right.
Neither did I. I discovered them a little earlier, but like, I remember when, so when Nevermind came out, there was still the Sub Pop logo. There was no internet. I was in a big city. It was not the US. I don't think it would have mattered that much, like at that age. Like, yeah, it was just okay, I know it's Sub Pop. I couldn't understand what Sub Pop represented for Seattle, and maybe for the north west underground, because it didn't really represent anything for anyone else in the world outside maybe 500 weirdos scattered around the US who were part of the scene by being artists or booking small shitty venues. Or I'm hyperboling, but like the one thing I know was what happened in 91 was the people who were aware of them, or the people who were aware of them from the get-go. We were kind of living in anticipation of the world catching up on it, fully knowingly that it was gonna happen. It was like there was, and of course you don't know, but it was almost sort of a religious belief that like this is literally the answer. This is gonna be, and not like, oh, this Wembanyama is gonna change the NBA. Like it was on a different level. It was like cultural. Like, and I remember being in junior high and thinking, like, my classmates, they don't know what they're about to get hit with.
I mean, I think there's
this sentiment inside on a daily basis for months.
There's something that a lot of, I think, Beatles fans tend to say about the Ed Sullivan appearance, which is like, when I saw that, and I'm not, any experience that you have with the Beatles is great. I'm not discrediting that, but it's said that, when I saw them on Ed Sullivan, the world became color.
Yeah, but that's
great. That's great. But when I saw Nirvana do Smells Like Teen Spirit, the world became a little more real.
Yeah.
Like it became a little more attainable. It became a little more like, oh, I can look. Yeah, they had nice faces, but they had, Kurt had hair in his eyes.
But what you mean is it became more exciting because of what you said. It became more exciting because we felt part of it.
Yeah, exactly. It felt like, again, I had no context for anything about Nirvana, but even then,
way to conclude this.
Sure. I think you're right. I think even with this conversation we had with Laurie and everything that we're discussing, it still feels like that, that we're connected, not, connected in some way that like, oh, that's just somebody doing their job. That's just a working musician. I don't revere Kurt, and I don't revere anybody in Nirvana or in any band. I don't think you really should. But what I think is great about the conversation that we had and that we're closing up is that part of the reason why I think you and I get along so well is that I know that you're really into very specific, very, for lack of a better term, very artsy things. You know, very, very intellectual things. But I think what's really great about you though, Stunty, is that you're able to have this conversation and still reference Carolina or Sun City Girls or, you know, Square Pusher or something like that.
I hope that what's great about us having this conversation is that it demonstrates that coming from this background, a silly punk rock band, it keeps us wanting to keep thinking, to keep finding new ways to look at things, to never have this become static. Otherwise, there's no reason to even think about it anymore, because like growing up, or no, not growing up, growing is more, we're already grown-ups, so we can't grow up, we can just grow, keep growing. Yeah. And the way you do it, you know, building neural connections is by
and like going outside of your comfort zone. And again, I know I said this earlier, and I know we clowned on Thurston for doing his top 350. That's ridiculous. But I think that the ultimate point with that is that stop just like resting in your laurels. Stop thinking that like what the art and music that you're into stops at a certain point. There's so much good stuff going on.
You know what's the most ridiculous about Thurston Moore's 350 best records of 2025 list is?
What's that?
Is that by the end of 2026, it will have grown into top 800.
Oh yeah, I can see up to 1,000. It's gonna be like you know, like it's almost like a Merzbow kind of thing, where it's like, you know, the Merz box with like 60 CDs. It's like that, you know, and then he put out another thing with like 100. Yeah, it's just gonna get ridiculous. But the point stands. It's, I think, and to really conclude this, what Nirvana did for me was, it was like, and Sonic Youth to a degree, but it was really Nirvana that was like, keep searching, keep pushing yourself to find new things. Don't just settle with whatever you've got going on in terms of like art and culture and music, because there's always something new to discover. And that's why, to me, like, I think hearing about new music, I don't care about the VC, because I don't care about classic records. I care about like what's the forward thinking thing.
I think that you have a bunch of classic records nowadays, right on your right.
No, I know, and I deserve to be clowned on that, but I think you understand my point. Yeah, there's always new good music happening, and I'm glad we had Nirvana in our life to kind of at least give me that sort of direction.
My takeaway from this is that, like, we can only talk about ourselves. Like, for us, having lived around this time when it was happening, it was really exciting, because it was the first time anything culturally massive felt real, that we were part of the same reality as them. So if you're sort of, you say, investigative mind, but also maybe if you want to be part of the world and not just look at it, and being part of the world means that you do something that you might fail, you might succeed, but with the goal of like existing in a way. And that was the band that did it for us. What does it mean for people who have discovered Nirvana in the past 25 years? Difficult for us to say, but that's why there's a comment section to this video. And if you've reached that far into the video, which, yeah, obviously it's way too long, but like, then you can afford to tell us if you're...
Well, to end it in a way, because the very first question you ask is, why are we still talking about Nirvana in 2025? Because of this stuff.
Yeah, but we are the right age as well. Maybe people who are...
Yeah, sure. But I hope, and I hope that, you know, the younger people discover Nirvana and then burn that down and do something new. It deserves to be burned down.
Is it possible? I'm sorry, like I'm expanding, but like it's an open question. Then I guess could younger people who discover Nirvana now or in the past 25 years get something similar from them that we did? I don't know.
I think so. I think, again, I think it's what you get out of it. What I hope that younger people get out of it, not just from a musicality perspective, but like what I just said, Nirvana, it felt like they burned something down. And I'm not talking about hair metal. I'm not talking about any of those sort of mainstream reference points. I just mean like that it felt like, no, like I'm going to do this thing. And I think there's plenty of young bands that are doing that and that are influenced by Nirvana, maybe not musically, but from that sort of idea, that perspective. And it's okay to kill your idols. It's okay to be like, yeah, I don't really listen to Nirvana that much anymore.
Yeah, which is why it's impossible to have that if you're a Pearl Jam fan.
Yeah, well, that's not it.
I thought like I'll manage to do this whole thing without like
I mean,
them, but like that has to be the sore, bitter, bad conclusion to this video because I mean, Happy New Year!
Happy New Year, Stunty. Thank you for having me as always, and I'm sure we'll do something again in the future together.
Probably.